Hello, literary travelers. Welcome to Literary Journeys with River. Today, we're diving into the first book of the acclaimed Outlander, Saga by Diana Gabaldon. This is an illustrated summary, not the full book, but I promise will capture all the magic and adventure that Claire Fraser experiences when she's transported from 1945 to 18th century Scotland. Get ready for a journey through time filled with romance, history, and mystery. Part 1. Inverness, 1945. Chapter 1. In 1945, Claire Randall and her husband Frank are staying at a guest house in the Scottish Highlands, a peaceful place far removed from the horrors of the war. The guest house, run by the kind and plump Mrs. Baird, is a typical Scottish establishment with faded floral wallpaper and gleaming floors. After 4 years as an army nurse, Claire revels in the freedom of wearing colorful cotton dresses, though they are impractical for walks across the grasslands. Frank and Claire have chosen this place to rediscover each other after years of separation due to the war. Frank, with a passion for genealogy, has a special interest in one of his ancestors, Jonathan Wolverton Randall, known as Black Jack, who was in the region during the 18th century. The day passes with jokes and the routine of life at the guest house. While Frank meets with a local priest to investigate his roots, Claire strolls through the village, savoring the sense of normalcy after years of rationing. She stops by a shop and buys some vases, feeling, for the first time in a long while, that she is in a place where she can establish a home. Back at the guest house, Claire and Frank discover a bloodstain at the entrance, prompting Frank to explain that it's a ritual sacrifice, a local superstition to appease the spirits, a custom that still persists in the Highlands. That night, during a storm, Frank returns agitated, having seen a mysterious man, a kilted Scot, standing outside the house and staring at Claire's window. Though he tries to rationalize it, Frank is unsettled by the experience. The night ends with a conversation between them about the possibility of infidelity during the war, a topic that arises due to their long separation. Claire, despite her initial anger at the suggestion, reaffirms her love for Frank, though inwardly, she begins to question certain aspects of their relationship and the time they spent apart. Chapter 2. At dawn, Mr. Crook picks up Claire on an old motorcycle to explore the Scottish countryside. Claire is fascinated to discover the elderly man's deep knowledge of local plants, their medicinal uses, and how to prepare them. During the excursion, they reach a mysterious hill called Cray Na Dun, where a circle of standing stones rises at its summit. Claire, marveling at the monolith and its similarities to Stonehenge, thinks that Frank would be excited to see the place and decides to bring him there later. That same day, Claire heads to the vicarage to meet Frank, who is immersed in researching his ancestor, Jonathan, Black Jack, Randall. Alongside Father Wakefield, Frank has discovered 18th century military dispatches that mention his ancestor, suggesting that he may have been a secret agent under the protection of the Duke of Sandringham. Claire, though somewhat distant, listens to Frank's excited revelations while the vicar entertains her with stories of genealogy. Back at the guest house, Claire and Frank discuss the possibility of adopting a child, but Frank expresses his desire to have a biological child, something that brings them emotionally closer. Claire, feeling the strength of their relationship, reconciles herself to the idea, though the desire to start a family remains a sensitive topic. The next morning, Claire and Frank climb to Cray Na Dun before dawn to witness a druidic ceremony that Frank had heard about. Hidden among the bushes, they observe a group of village women, dressed in white sheets, performing a ritual dance within the stone circle. The scene is both ridiculous and awe-inspiring, especially when Mrs. Graham, the vicar's housekeeper, leads the ritual with unexpected force. After the ceremony, Frank, excited by what they have witnessed, urges Claire to return to the site later to investigate further. Claire agrees and returns alone to Cray Na Dun the next day. While searching for a plant she had seen earlier, something strange happens. As she touches one of the larger stones, she hears a scream that seems to come from the very rock. Stunned and terrified, Claire feels the world around her disintegrate, leading her into an inexplicable experience that leaves her disoriented and confused at the base of the hill. As she regains consciousness, she hears nearby shouts and, still dizzy, heads toward the sounds, unaware that her life is about to change forever. Chapter 3. Claire, still confused and dazed, sees a group of men in Scottish kilts running through a nearby clearing, followed by others in red coats firing muskets. At first, she thinks it's a film shoot, but the harsh reality hits her when one of the Scots grabs her and, after a struggle, drags her to a hidden place. At first, she mistakes her captor for Frank, her husband, but soon realizes that this man, who introduces himself as Jonathan Randall, is an English officer seemingly straight out of the 18th century and bears an unsettling resemblance to Frank. Randall subdues her and behaves aggressively until a Scot named Murtaugh suddenly appears and knocks him down. The Scot forcibly drags her to a cabin where she meets a group of Scottish men, all rough and dangerous. Among them, Dougal stands out, an authoritative man who seems to lead them. Claire introduces herself by her maiden name, Claire Beecham, to avoid compromising Frank, and is questioned about her identity and presence there. In the cabin, Claire watches as they attend to a young man named Jamie, who has suffered a severe shoulder wound and a dislocated arm. Seeing the men's clumsy attempts to help him, Claire takes charge and, using her skills as a nurse, manages to set Jamie's shoulder, earning the respect of the Scots. However, her situation does not improve as Dougal decides to take her with them, concerned that if she is an English spy, she could betray them to the Redcoats. During the journey, Claire discovers that they are in a much more dangerous time than she had imagined. Jamie, despite his wounds, insists on continuing the journey, and although Claire worries about his condition, she realizes that she has little choice but to go along with them. They finally arrive at a ruined cabin where Jamie collapses from blood loss. Claire, concerned about his condition, tends to him again, though it is clear the situation is critical. Dougal, insensitive to her protests, insists on continuing the journey, leaving Claire trapped in an increasingly desperate situation, unable to fully understand where she is or how she got there. Chapter 4. Claire's journey continued through the darkness and cold, across rugged terrain, accompanied by armed Scots and an injured Jamie, as they headed toward Leok Castle. As they advanced, the desolate landscape gave way to the imposing presence of a stone fortress, surrounded by people dressed in rough clothing who stared at Claire in astonishment at her out-of-place attire. Leok Castle, a rough and solid structure with thick walls and smoking chimneys, rose before them, protected by a moat and a stone bridge. Upon arrival, Dougal, the group's leader, ordered the men to be fed and for Mrs. Fitzgibbons, the castle's steward, to be informed of their arrival. Claire, who had not spoken much during the journey, finally asked Jamie where they were, and upon learning they were at Leok Castle, began to accept the reality that she was trapped in the 18th century. Mrs. Fitzgibbons, a robust and energetic woman, arrived to greet them and, after a brief exchange, took Claire and Jamie inside the castle to tend to their needs. Upon discovering that Jamie was injured, Claire insisted that he be treated immediately to prevent infection. Mrs. Fitzgibbons, proving to be an efficient assistant, provided Claire with the necessary ingredients to prepare a remedy: garlic, witch hazel, comfrey, and other elements one might find in a castle of that time. In a cold room, but with a cozy fireplace, Claire began treating Jamie's wounds, who was clearly exhausted. Upon removing the bandages, She was horrified to discover the scars on Jamie's back, a testament to brutal punishments. Jamie, trying to downplay it, explained that he had been flogged by English soldiers, the Redcoats, led by a captain named Randall. The conversation led Jamie to recount a painful story of how Captain Randall had attacked his home, abused his sister Jenny, and punished him cruelly. Claire, shocked by the brutality of the story and the possible connection to her husband Frank's ancestor, tried to stay focused on her task of healing Jamie. As the story unfolded, Claire felt increasingly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation, the exhaustion, and the worry for Frank. Finally, she broke down in tears, unable to contain her emotions. Jamie, showing unexpected tenderness, comforted her, promising that she had nothing to fear as long as he was around. After a while, Claire pulled herself together, and they shared a simple but comforting meal. Jamie, concerned about her state, suggested she rest a bit before others in the castle wanted to talk to her. Exhausted, Claire fell into a deep sleep in the room's bed, uncertain of what awaited her when she awoke. Chapter 5. Claire woke up in total confusion, feeling that something was wrong but unable to remember what. The depth of her sleep had left her disoriented, unsure of where she was. It was the firm voice of Mrs. Fitzgibbons, urging her to get up, that brought her back to reality. With a clearer mind, Claire remembered her situation and, still overwhelmed by the cold, wrapped herself in a blanket and went to the fire. Mrs. Fitzgibbons, in her energetic manner, wasted no time preparing her for the audience she would have with the lord of the castle. She stripped Claire of her unsuitable modern attire and dressed her in 18th century clothes, a yellowed chemise, brown skirts, a pale bodice, and yellow slippers. Despite Claire's protests, Mrs. Fitzgibbons dressed her carefully, including a pink ribbon in her hair, lamenting the short cut, which she didn't consider appropriate for a lady. Once dressed, Claire was led to the presence of Colum Mackenzie, the clan chief. Colum, an imposing man, though physically limited by his twisted and short legs, received her in a tower room, decorated luxuriously and with a warm atmosphere, in stark contrast to the rest of the austere castle. Claire's attention was captured by a large cage full of small birds flying and singing, a sanctuary that reflected Colum's introspective nature. Colum introduced himself politely, but Claire, aware of her precarious situation, wasted no time in expressing her desire to be returned to the place where she had been found. However, Colum, with a mix of kindness and cunning, invited her to sit and enjoy a refreshment, making it clear that he wouldn't rush to fulfill her request. Trying to stay calm, Claire presented the story she had prepared, mixing truth with strategic lies. She told Colum she was a widow from Oxfordshire who had been assaulted by highwaymen while traveling to France. Despite her tale, Colum showed veiled skepticism, especially when she mentioned being attacked by Captain Randall, a name that was clearly not unfamiliar to him. When Colum briefly left the room, Claire took the opportunity to investigate her surroundings. She found a letter on the desk that confirmed her worst fears. The date written was April 20th, 1743, confirming that she had traveled through time. This revelation left her trembling, and she could barely maintain her composure when Colum returned. The clan chief resumed questioning her, especially about her state of undress when she was found. Although she tried to defend her story, Colum's skepticism persisted. Finally, Colum dismissed her politely, making it clear that he would keep her at the castle until he could discover who she really was. Part 2. Leok Castle. Chapter 6. Claire was fetched for dinner by a young man named Alec and led to a long hall where the castle's inhabitants gathered to eat. The tables, lined against the walls, were full of people eating carelessly, served by servants who came and went with trays and jugs. The atmosphere was bustling, with conversations in Gaelic and the soft glow of sunset filtering through the narrow windows. Colm Mackenzie, the clan leader, was already seated at the main table, accompanied by his wife Letitia and their son Hamish, a red-haired boy with an intense gaze. Claire was introduced to the family and sat beside them, observing the diners and adapting to the food, which, while familiar in some ways, also presented challenges, such as eating smoked herring with a spoon. Hamish, Colm's son, scolded Claire for not blessing the table, which led her to ask him to do it for her. With unexpected solemnity, the boy recited a brief prayer before everyone began to eat. The dinner passed with little conversation, but Claire noticed the absence of Jamie, the injured young man she had attended to earlier. During the meal, Jamie's condition was discussed. He had been sent to the stables by Dougal, Colm's brother. Dougal, an imposing and severe man, explained that he had decided it was the best place for Jamie, which created a slight tension between the brothers. Claire, concerned about Jamie's wound, decided she would seek him out the next day to ensure he was all right. After dinner, Claire retired to rest, but not before Colm informed her that she would be summoned to an audience the next day. The mention of the audience increased her nervousness, but she was too tired to think about it that night. The next morning, Mrs. Fitzgibbons woke Claire early, preparing her carefully for the audience, dressing and grooming her as befit a lady of high rank. Claire, aware of the importance of the occasion, let Mrs. Fitzgibbons dress her without protest. The audience was held in the same dining hall, which had been transformed for the occasion. The tables were pushed aside, and a large wooden chair, covered with the Mackenzie tartan, occupied the central place. Colm entered, followed by his brother Dougal, both dressed in ceremonial attire that highlighted their rank and authority. Colm, with his twisted legs, walked with deliberate slowness, showing his dominant presence despite his disability. The audience began with Colm dispensing justice and resolving disputes among the clan's inhabitants. Claire was called to the front, where Dougal presented her case, explaining that Claire had been found in danger and requesting that she be given refuge in the castle until her English relatives could be contacted. Though Dougal's words were courteous, the emphasis on her English origin underscored the distrust her presence generated. After Claire's presentation, the audience continued with the case of a young woman accused by her father of disobedience and inappropriate conduct with young men. The situation grew tense when the father requested that the girl be punished publicly. However, Jamie McTavish, the injured young man, intervened, offering to take the punishment in the girl's place. Despite Claire's protests and his own physical condition, Jamie was repeatedly beaten, enduring the punishment with surprising fortitude. After the audience, Claire found Jamie in a small courtyard where, despite his wounds, he was calm and gratefully accepted the help Claire offered him. Mrs. Fitzgibbons also tended to his injuries, applying leeches to reduce the swelling. Despite the harshness of the punishment, Jamie explained to Claire that he had done it to avoid humiliating the girl, thus showing his noble spirit. Later, Claire devoted herself to working in the castle's herb garden under Mrs. Fitzgibbons' supervision, who taught her about medicinal plants. During the day, Claire reflected on the men of the clan, their hard lives, and their values, becoming impressed by Jamie's resilience and bravery. At the end of the day, Claire realized that, absorbed in her thoughts, she had forgotten to remove the bandages from Jamie's injured shoulder, promising herself to do so as soon as she had the chance. Chapter 7. Claire returned to the castle after her walk and was surprised by a soldier waiting to take her to Colm Mackenzie. In Colm's quarters, the wind blew through the large open windows, creating an almost outdoor atmosphere as the lord of the castle received her courteously. After exchanging some pleasantries, Colm led her to the bird cages, where they both admired the small inhabitants fluttering among the branches. The conversation soon turned to Claire's healing ability, a topic Colum approached with an apparently casual tone but with clear interest. Colum mentioned that, according to Dougal and Mrs. Fitz, Claire had demonstrated remarkable medical skill. Despite Claire's modesty, who considered what she had done to be easy, Colum seemed impressed and took the opportunity to tell her about the dispensary of the late Davy Beaton, the castle's last healer. However, despite the fame of the Beaton clan's healers in the Highlands, Colum didn't mourn Beaton's loss too much, as he had succumbed to a fever long ago. Thus, he invited Claire to explore the abandoned dispensary to see if she found anything useful among the late healer's belongings. Claire agreed, intrigued by the offer, and Colum decided to accompany her personally. They descended the castle stairs, with Claire noticing the pain Colum experienced when walking, which led her to suggest massages to relieve the pain. Colum mentioned that his servant, Angus Moore, already provided them every night, but made it clear he didn't need more help. Davy Beaton's dispensary turned out to be a dark and forgotten room, hidden behind the kitchens, near the cemetery where its former owner rested. Upon entering, Claire faced a thick layer of dust and darkness, where only a thin beam of light pierced the room from a small slit in the wall. Colum, who seemed to be there for the first time, explored the place with Claire, both reflecting on the mysteries of the late healer and his seemingly low effectiveness, considering the number of patients who had died under his care. Claire began examining the shelves, full of jars and pots labeled with names in Latin, some of which were unsettling, like Pearls Ovis or Mouse Ear. She soon decided it would be better if Mrs. Fitz sent her assistants to clean the place before she continued her exploration. After Colum left with a cutting remark about hoping Claire would be more effective than Beaton, Claire was left alone, thinking about the enigmatic experience she had lived through when she passed through the stone circle. She reflected on the sounds and sensations she had experienced, concluding that the stones might have been some kind of time portal. Determined to find out more, she realized that she would eventually have to return to the stone circle to get answers. Interrupted by two young girls sent by Mrs. Fitz to clean the dispensary, Claire decided to go to the kitchen to get something to eat. Later, she brought food to Jamie, who was still working with the horses in the meadow. While they shared the food, Jamie revealed that he was a fugitive with a price on his head, falsely accused of murder, though he had killed some English soldiers in the past. The conversation took a more personal turn when Jamie showed her a scar on the back of his neck, remembering how he had almost lost his life in France after being attacked. The chat was interrupted by Alec McMahon Mackenzie, the castle's head groom, a stout and authoritative man who clearly respected Jamie. Despite Alec's apparent roughness, there was mutual respect between him and Jamie, reflected in the way they discussed horses. Alec suggested that Jamie consider staying at the castle and taking on the role of head groom in the future, a tempting offer for Jamie, though he still hesitated due to his pride and reluctance to give up his lineage. After the conversation, Claire returned to the dispensary, now clean thanks to Mrs. Fitz's assistance. There, she spent the afternoon investigating the jars and pots, some of which contained curious ingredients like horse manure, worms, and millipedes. Although she discarded many of the substances as impractical or even repugnant, she found some useful elements, like cobwebs for bandaging wounds, which she decided to keep. Just as Claire finished her inspection, two young men entered the dispensary, one of them injured. Apparently, the castle's new healer already had work. Chapter 8. Claire lay in her bed, completely exhausted, but with a renewed sense of satisfaction after spending the day in Beaton's dispensary. The contact with patients and the practice of medicine had lessened the lingering fear she felt since her fall through the stone. Despite the harshness of her surroundings, she had found solace in the familiar routine of examining bodies and treating ailments. This feeling of usefulness gave her a sense of control amid the chaos that surrounded her. Colum Mackenzie remained an enigma to Claire. Though he was a courteous and learned man, he hid a steely determination beneath his kindly facade. In contrast, his brother Dougal, a warrior by birth, displayed his hardness clearly. However, it was evident who the true leader was. Colum, despite his degenerative disease, Toulouse-Lautrec syndrome, maintained control over the clan with indisputable authority. As Claire reflected on Colum's illness and its implications, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. A young man delivered an invitation from Colum to attend a singing session in the hall. Intrigued by the possibility of observing Colum in another context, Claire accepted the invitation. The hall, lit by torches and dominated by a single fire in the fireplace, was arranged for the evening. Colum, already seated in his carved chair, received her kindly, serving her a delicate rose wine that quickly took effect. As the room filled with people, Claire observed the interaction between Colum and the others, noticing his fatigue, though he maintained his leader's demeanor. The conversation with Colum became uncomfortable when he insisted that Claire provide the names of her relatives in France, which she avoided doing, knowing that Colum was trying to gather information. The poet Gwylyn, a slender man with a harp, began his performance with a song in Gaelic, followed by another in Welsh. His music had a hypnotic effect, leading the listeners into an almost trance-like state. During a pause, Claire, sitting next to Jamie and Leok, listened as Jamie translated an ancient Welsh ballad. Though she tried to engage Leok in the conversation, the young woman seemed more interested in Jamie, who responded courteously but without much enthusiasm. The evening continued with tales of goblins and legends, stories that captivated Claire's attention, reminding her of the old stories she had heard in her own time. The idea that the women in those stories always returned filled her with a mix of hope and anxiety. The possibility that she, too, might return through the stones both excited and terrified her in equal measure. After the singing session, Jamie escorted Claire to her room, concerned about the effect of the strong wine she had drunk. Once there, Claire remembered she needed to change Jamie's shoulder bandage, and he finally admitted that he had avoided removing his shirt in front of others to hide the scars on his back. Jamie explained that the scars were a constant reminder of his suffering, and he preferred that others not see him that way, as a victim. Claire, moved by his sincerity, removed the bandage and gently touched the scars, acknowledging the pain Jamie had endured. The next day, Claire spent the morning tending to more patients and reorganizing the dispensary, eager for a break that led her to explore the upper floors of the castle. During her exploration, she stumbled upon Jamie in a hidden corner, kissing a blonde young woman, Leok. Though she felt uncomfortable, she decided not to interfere, but she couldn't help worrying about the possible consequences of that flirtation. That night, during dinner, Claire noticed that Jamie's mouth was swollen, giving her the opportunity to joke about his encounter with Leok. Jamie, blushing, tried to downplay the incident while Alec, the head groom, scolded him for his apparent clumsiness. After Jamie left the table, Alec made an enigmatic comment about Jamie's inappropriate relationship with Leok, suggesting that Jamie needed a woman, not a girl, as a wife. Claire was left pondering Alec's words, realizing that there was much more to the relationship between Jamie and Leok than she had perceived, and that life at Leok Castle was full of complexities she was just beginning to understand. Chapter 9. Claire's life was beginning to take on a routine within Leok Castle. At dawn, she would rise with the other inhabitants, have breakfast in the Great Hall, and then devote herself to various tasks such as working in the gardens or helping in the kitchen. Occasionally, she would attend to patients in the dim dispensary of the late Beaton. Some days, Claire visited the stables and marveled at the transformation of the horses in the spring. In the evenings, if she wasn't too tired, she would join the gatherings in the Great Hall, enjoying the stories and music. As time passed, the castle's inhabitants grew accustomed to Claire's presence, and some women began to timidly approach her to establish friendships and ask her about medicine. Their curiosity towards her increased when they discovered her knowledge of healing. Moreover, the upcoming gathering, an important event at the castle, was a recurring topic of conversation. The preparations for the gathering were in full swing, with tons of food, barrels of beer, and other supplies being stored in the castle. Claire even participated in the fruit harvest in the nearby orchards, enjoying the fresh Scottish mist as she selected the best cherries and apricots. During one of these orchard expeditions, Claire met Gillis Duncan, a tall woman with light hair and bright green eyes. Gillis, with a mocking smile, warned her about the poisonous mushrooms Claire was collecting. The conversation between the two flowed naturally, and Gillis revealed herself to be a practical person knowledgeable about plants, though with a sarcastic sense of humor and a suspicious knowledge of witchcraft. Despite the occasional provocation, Claire enjoyed Gillis's company, who also seemed to be aware of all the gossip in the castle and village. The gathering was beginning to attract visitors to the castle, and Claire, watching the growing activity, planned to use the chaos to escape. However, her plans were interrupted by an outbreak of food poisoning in the castle. Determined to find the cause, Claire discovered that the contaminated meat came from the slaughterhouse. While she scolded the responsible party, she was interrupted by Dougal Mackenzie, who invited her to accompany him to the village of Cranesmere to gather herbs at the Duncans' house. Claire accepted the invitation eagerly, enjoying the ride to the village despite the dark and rainy weather. Upon arriving at the Duncans' house, Gillis warmly welcomed Claire and led her to her well-equipped herbery. While grinding herbs, the two women chatted, and Claire was surprised to find that Gillis didn't seem interested in asking much about her past. The afternoon passed normally until a noise in the street attracted their attention. From the window, Claire watched as Father Bain, the village priest, dragged a boy toward the Duncans' house, followed by a crowd. Gillis explained that the boy had probably been caught stealing and that his punishment depended on her husband, Arthur Duncan's mood. Horrified at the possibility that the boy might be mutilated, Claire asked Gillis to intercede on his behalf. Gillis, initially indifferent, agreed to try, and Claire continued working nervously, fearing for the boy's fate. Finally, Gillis returned, satisfied with her performance before her husband, and informed Claire that she had managed to secure the lightest possible sentence. The boy would only have to spend an hour in the pillory with one ear nailed. Although relieved, Claire was still dismayed by the brutality of the punishment. The situation became even more disturbing when Jamie McTavish appeared at the Duncans' house to take her back to the castle. Jamie explained that the boy was still in the pillory because he hadn't mustered the courage to pull out the nail. Horrified, Claire devised a plan to help the boy, asking Jamie for assistance. Though Jamie was aware of the risk he was taking, he agreed to help her. The maneuver was successful. Claire feigned a fainting spell, distracting the crowd, while Jamie discreetly freed the boy from the nail. The boy quickly fled, and the crowd, now focused on Claire, escorted her back to the Duncans' house, where she was received with sympathy and care. Later, as they returned to the castle in the rain, Claire tried to thank Jamie for his bravery. Though he downplayed the danger, Claire felt they had forged a solid friendship that went beyond circumstances. Chapter 10. In the days leading up to the grand ceremony, Leok Castle bustled with unusual activity. The preparations for the Oath of Allegiance to Colum Mackenzie occupied everyone, and the atmosphere was charged with expectation. Claire, aware of the importance of the night, planned to use the occasion to escape. She had gathered supplies, chosen a horse, and decided to leave without a trace, thus avoiding any confrontation or awkward explanation. However, that very night, When she approached the stable to carry out her plan, her escape was unexpectedly thwarted. In the darkness of the stable, Claire stumbled and fell on a solid object, which turned out to be Jamie McTavish, who was also there, apparently for his own reasons. Discovering her escape plan, Jamie warned her of the dangers and futility of her attempt, explaining that Column's guards patrolled the castle and the woods. Despite her anger, Claire understood that she had no choice but to return with Jamie to the castle. The conversation shifted to the oath ceremony, and Claire realized that Jamie was deliberately avoiding the ceremony. Though he was reluctant to admit it, his tone and attitude made it clear that he didn't want to swear allegiance to Column. However, before they could continue talking, they were both intercepted by a group of drunken guards who led them to the castle's hall, where the ceremony was about to begin. Inside the castle, Jamie was forced to dress in the ceremonial attire of the Mackenzie clan and taken to the Great Hall, where dozens of men were preparing to swear allegiance. Claire, aware of the danger Jamie faced if he refused to swear, watched him from a gallery, her heart in her throat. The ceremony was grand and solemn. Column, in all his splendor, presided over the event from an elevated platform, receiving the oaths of his men. When Jamie's turn came, instead of kneeling and swearing allegiance, he stood tall and, with a firm voice, rejected the direct oath to Column. Instead, he offered his help, obedience, and goodwill, maintaining his loyalty to the name he bore. The tension in the hall was palpable, but Column, after a moment of deliberation, accepted Jamie's offer, relieving everyone present. The night continued with feasting, music, and drinking, but Claire, aware of the danger of staying among drunken men, tried to return to her room. On the way, she was harassed by some clan men, but Dougal Mackenzie intervened and saved her. However, far from being completely altruistic, Dougal also took the opportunity to kiss her aggressively before letting her go, a gesture that left Claire shocked. The next morning, despite the excesses of the previous night, the clan men prepared for a boar hunt in the nearby woods. Claire was called to attend to the wounded during the hunt and witnessed a violent encounter between Dougal and a boar. Though Dougal managed to kill the beast, one of the men, named Geordie, was gravely injured. Claire, unable to save him, assisted Dougal as the man died slowly. The experience briefly united Claire and Dougal in a shared painful task, but also revealed a more human side of Dougal, who showed unexpected affection for his fallen comrade. Geordie's death did not halt events at Leok. The games began the next day, and Claire spent most of the time tending to the injured. Exhausted, she headed to the stable to seek some peace and, perhaps, meet Jamie. However, instead, she found Dougal and Jamie, who were engaged in a serious conversation. Dougal informed her that they would leave in 2 days and that she and Jamie would accompany him. The final destination would be Fort William, where Dougal suggested she might receive help in finding her way home, though Claire knew this also meant Dougal expected to gather more information about her. For Claire, this opportunity to leave Leok under Dougal's protection was an unexpected gift. With Fort William as the destination, she saw a chance to finally escape and return to her own time through the stone circle at Cray na Dun. The prospect of freedom was closer than ever. Part 3. On the Road. Chapter 11. The departure left Leok Castle in the dim light of dawn, the group of riders and animals slipping silently through the mist that enveloped the landscape. Claire, feeling a mix of sadness and relief at leaving the castle and its inhabitants behind, rode in the middle of the caravan alongside Ned Gowan, a small older man whose meticulous appearance bordered on the caricature. She soon discovered that Ned was not just a scribe, but a lawyer with an intriguing past. Ned Gowan, born and educated in Edinburgh, had left a comfortable city life to seek adventure in the remote Highlands. His journey led him to meet Jacob Mackenzie, Jamie's grandfather, who hired him to serve as his personal lawyer. Gawain, with his cunning and knowledge of the law, helped Jacob consolidate his power, and when Jacob died, Gawain continued serving the Mackenzie clan, first under Jacob and then under Colum, whom he had helped become leader despite his physical limitations. During their chat, Gawain made it clear that he was committed to the clan and loyal to Colum, though his love of adventure and willingness to secretly help Claire also emerged. As they continued their journey, the group stopped in several villages where Dougal Mackenzie collected rents from the tenants. These gatherings, much more informal than the audiences at the castle, allowed the tenants to express their concerns and deliver payments in kind or in coins, while Ned Gawain meticulously recorded each transaction. Jamie, who accompanied the group, was included in the journey to evaluate the horses offered as payment, but Claire soon discovered the true reason for his presence. In a small village, Dougal conducted a strange and disturbing spectacle. After entertaining the villagers with stories and jokes, Dougal ripped Jamie's shirt, exposing his back, covered in scars from the brutal floggings he had suffered at the hands of the English. The audience, horrified by the scars, reacted with shouts of indignation and hatred toward the English, while Dougal used their emotions to collect donations in support of Prince Charles Edward and the Jacobite cause. Claire, witnessing this manipulation, understood that Dougal's purpose was to raise funds for the Jacobite rebellion, using Jamie's story as a tool to inflame the villagers against the English. Jamie endured this humiliating ritual repeatedly, growing more angry and sad each time. The breaking point came in a village called Tunnig, when a young villager made an offensive comment, prompting Jamie to punch him, sparking a fight. Despite being outnumbered, Jamie defeated his opponents with strength and skill, earning the villagers' respect, though his relationship with Dougal seemed increasingly tense. That night, as Jamie tried to find relief after the fight, Claire found him punching a tree to release his frustration. They talked about his fighting skills, inherited from his father, and about his left-handedness, which had made him a versatile and dangerous fighter. Despite Jamie's apparent calm, Claire could sense the tension and inner conflict that weighed on him. Finally, as Claire treated his wounds in a small shed, Murtagh, a man loyal to Jamie, arrived with a bag of coins, his share of the bets won in the fight. Although Jamie initially refused the money, Murtagh insisted he accept it. The conversation took a mysterious turn when Murtagh mentioned a place called Lagcrum, suggesting that Jamie would soon have the opportunity to resolve an important matter related to someone named Horrocks. Although the details were vague, Claire sensed that Jamie might be approaching a resolution to his problems. At the end of the night, as Claire retired to rest, she realized that the journey was far from a simple rent collection. It was a path filled with dangers and revelations, with Jamie at the center of an internal and external struggle for his freedom and his future. Chapter 12. As the group approached Fort William, Claire began to think about her options once they arrived. The situation was uncertain. If the commander saw her as a lady in distress, she might receive help to travel to the coast and sail to France. However, the possibility of being suspected as an English spy, especially due to her association with the Mackenzies, filled her with unease. She knew that Colum and Dougal suspected her, and she feared that the commander might think the same, complicating her situation even further. The journey continued, and Claire was relieved to see a large town, which usually meant a decent inn and a good meal. The inn where they stayed turned out to be quite spacious, though the bed they offered her seemed more suited to a dwarf. However, the privacy of having a room to herself was a luxury she hadn't experienced in a long time. Despite the primitive accommodations, she couldn't sleep easily, disturbed by the loneliness and silence compared to the noisy nights spent with the men of the clan. Her thoughts were interrupted by a creak in the hallway. Someone was approaching her door with slow and cautious steps. In the dim light, Claire prepared to confront the intruder, holding a candlestick as her only weapon. However, to her surprise, the figure turned out to be Jamie, who, with his usual sense of duty, had stationed himself outside her door to protect her from the drunken English soldiers staying at the inn. Although Claire appreciated the gesture, she insisted that Jamie come into the room to sleep on the floor, where he would be more comfortable and safer than in the dirty hallway. The next morning, Jamie was gone when Claire woke up. Dougal was waiting downstairs, urging her to get ready quickly as they needed to head to Brockton. Without giving her more explanation, they set off in the morning mist. The destination was the commander of the Fort William garrison, who was staying at an inn in Brockton with a patrol of dragoons. This unexpected meeting complicated Claire's plans, as she had hoped to part ways with Dougal at the fort, which was closer to Cray na Dun, her only way back to her time. Upon arriving in Brockton, Dougal went up to see the commander, while Claire waited in the lounge. The presence of the English soldiers made her nervous, a strange feeling considering they were her compatriots, albeit from another time. Finally, Dougal called her, and Claire went upstairs, only to find herself face to face with Captain Jonathan Randall, a man who, to her horror, bore Frank's face, but with a cruelty and arrogance that clearly distinguished him. Randall, with a challenging and skeptical attitude, began to interrogate her. Claire tried to remain calm and recounted the same story she had told Colum, but Randall did not hide his disbelief. Despite the growing tension, Claire tried to stay composed, though the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. The captain, frustrated by the lack of answers he considered satisfactory, decided to take drastic measures. Suddenly, he called for a soldier, ordering him to hold Claire, and without warning, brutally punched her in the stomach. The impact left Claire breathless, dazed, and on the floor, while Randall, maintaining an unsettling calm, asked her if she had anything more to say. Despite the pain and confusion, Claire, in an act of defiance, could only point out that his wig was askew before closing her eyes, trying to regain control amid the distress. Chapter 13. After the violent encounter with Captain Randall, Claire found herself in a state of shock, sitting in the inn's lounge, struggling against nausea. Dougal, seeing her condition, quickly passed her and went upstairs to confront the captain. Although the doors were thick, Claire could still hear raised voices from the upper floor, indicating an intense confrontation. When Dougal returned, he did so with unyielding determination. Without a word, he lifted her and carried her out of the inn. They mounted their horses and quickly rode away, distancing themselves from the danger that Randall posed. Their journey took them to a hill where Dougal, without much explanation, guided her to a small spring, a quiet and secluded place. There, Dougal confronted her directly, asking if she knew the captain well. Claire, still recovering from the shock, responded coldly, making it clear that her encounter with Randall had been unpleasant. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Dougal asked if she was an English or French spy. Claire, irritated by the accusation, reaffirmed her identity as Claire Beecham, with no ties to espionage. Dougal, however, seemed lost in his own thoughts and soon revealed that he had witnessed the terrible punishment Jamie had endured under Randall's orders. The account was chilling, describing how Jamie had stoically endured the lashes, an act of bravery that had not broken his spirit. Claire, deeply affected by the story, couldn't help but wonder why Dougal was sharing these details with her. Dougal finally explained his concern. Randall had given orders to take her to Fort William for interrogation. However, Dougal also offered a solution. If Claire married a Scot, she would no longer be an English subject, and Randall would have no jurisdiction over her. The only viable option, according to Dougal, was for Claire to marry Jamie. The proposal left Claire stunned and furious. The idea of marrying someone out of obligation, in a time and place so foreign to her life seemed absurd. Though Dougal argued that Jamie was a good man and that, as a soldier, he would do what he was ordered, Claire insisted that she didn't want to marry neither Jamie nor anyone else. Despite this, Dougal continued with the marriage preparations, accompanied by Rupert and the lawyer Ned Gowan, who had already prepared the marriage contract. Desperate, Claire asked to speak with Jamie. When he appeared, Claire, despite her attempts to find a way out, realized that Jamie, though confused by the situation, was willing to marry her. The conversation was brief, and Jamie, with his usual mix of seriousness and humor, accepted the idea of marriage, making it clear that despite the circumstances, he was willing to protect her. With the papers signed, Claire, feeling trapped in an unlikely situation, went down to the inn and asked for a whiskey to try and calm her nerves. As she drank, the intensity of the situation overwhelmed her, and her mind began to wander, losing herself in irrelevant details as she tried to process what was happening. Shortly after, someone took the glass from her hand, and although she couldn't clearly discern the voices around her, she perceived a softer, more comforting tone that gave her a brief sense of relief. Finally, in a state of numbness, Claire realized that, like the fly caught in the splash on the table, her situation was desperate. With her fate sealed by decisions she hadn't made, she was about to marry Jamie, a marriage that, though it might offer her some protection, also bound her even more to a time and circumstances she hadn't chosen. Chapter 14. Claire woke up in a strange room, covered by a thick blanket and dressed only in her shift. The headache and discomfort made every movement feel like a great effort. The unexpected visit from Murtagh, and later from a woman who helped her dress and prepare, only accentuated her discomfort. Despite her protests, the woman insisted she must prepare for her wedding. Claire, still dazed, tried to resist but quickly realized her fate was sealed. A frenzy of activity enveloped Claire as she was dressed in a cream satin gown with lace and velvet details. The village seamstress, recruited to alter the dress, worked with the others to transform Claire into a bride worthy of admiration. Although the dress wasn't perfect and retained the smell of its previous owner, Claire couldn't help but feel beautiful and somewhat princess-like. When she descended to the main hall, she was met with looks of astonishment and admiration, especially from Dougal, who approved of her appearance with a nod. However, the reality of her situation hit her hard. She was about to marry Jamie, and the idea made her dizzy. The group left the inn, heading toward the chapel. Claire noted with disbelief that the place where the wedding would be held was the same one where, 2 centuries later, she had married Frank. The irony of the situation filled her with panic, but there was no escape. As she walked up the path flanked by Dougal and Jamie, she tried to resist, but finally relented. Upon reaching the chapel, the ceremony began. The priest's words echoed in Claire's mind, reminding her of her previous wedding. When it came time for the vows, Claire, in a state of shock, repeated the words, feeling that she and Jamie were holding each other up, as he also seemed nervous. When Jamie pronounced his full name, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, Claire realized the seriousness of the moment. After the vows, Jamie placed a ring on her finger, and though it was too large, Jamie held her hand firmly. The ceremony concluded with an unexpected and primitive blood ritual, where their wrists were cut and bound together with a white cloth, sealing the marriage with an ancient Gaelic oath. After the ceremony, Claire fainted, weakened by hunger and stress. When she woke up, she found herself lying on Jamie's lap, who was caring for her gently. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, Claire felt a strange comfort in Jamie's presence. After recovering a bit, Jamie explained that although they were now married, the marriage wouldn't be legal until it was consummated. Jamie's shyness and blush revealed the discomfort he also felt about what was to come. The chapter ends with Claire suggesting that before worrying about consummation, they should find something to eat, thus postponing the inevitable outcome of her new reality. Chapter 15. Back at the inn, a small wedding feast was organized for Claire and Jamie, with wine, fresh bread, and roasted meat. Before Claire could freshen up after the ceremony, Dougal intercepted her with a clear order. The marriage had to be consummated that night, leaving no doubt about its legality, as any possibility of annulment would put them in danger. Dougal, with his usual brusqueness, was determined to ensure that the union was definitive. In the room, Claire found herself in a state of disbelief and anxiety. The situation was surreal. Just 6 weeks ago, she had been picking flowers for her husband Frank, and now she was in a Scottish inn, waiting to consummate a forced marriage with a man she barely knew. The tension between her and Jamie was palpable when he entered the room, but Jamie, with his usual sincerity and kindness, broke the ice by assuring her that she had nothing to fear from him. The situation was awkward and new for both of them. Jamie, though inexperienced, showed surprising maturity by suggesting they talk to get to know each other better before taking the next step. He took Claire's hands, seeking to reassure her, and asked her to talk about Frank, knowing that he was still on her mind. This gesture of empathy and respect moved Claire, who began to relax a bit. As they talked, Jamie revealed his desire to be honest in their marriage. Although both had secrets they couldn't or didn't want to share, Jamie insisted that honesty should prevail in what they did choose to tell. Claire, moved by his sincerity, agreed to this pact of frankness. When Claire asked why he agreed to marry her, Jamie explained that his main reason was to protect her from Jack Randall, but he also mentioned, with a mix of shyness and humor, that he was attracted to her. The conversation, though awkward at first, became more intimate and close, breaking the ice between them. As the night wore on, physical closeness became inevitable. Jamie, despite his inexperience, showed a tenderness and concern for Claire's well-being that touched her. Both, nervous but determined, began to explore this new stage of their relationship. The initial awkwardness was quickly replaced by mutual understanding, and the physical union, though new for Jamie, was natural and satisfying for both. After consummating the marriage, the conversation became lighter and more relaxed. Jamie, with his characteristic sense of humor, talked about his misconceptions about sex and how he had learned by observing the animals on the farm. Claire, amused by Jamie's innocence in some aspects, explained some things he didn't know, and together, they shared laughter and confidences. Later, when Claire woke up trembling from a nightmare, Jamie reacted with the swiftness of a warrior, showing his protective instinct. After ensuring everything was fine, he returned to bed and comforted her, assuring her that she was safe with him. Claire, though still scared and aware of how strange everything was to her, felt comforted by Jamie's presence and the closeness they had begun to forge. The night ended with Jamie curled up next to Claire, assuring her that although their marriage had begun under unusual circumstances, they had a foundation to build something together. Claire, feeling safe and calm for the first time in days, allowed herself to drift off to sleep, though in the back of her mind, she wondered what kind of life awaited them now that they were united by this unexpected marriage. Chapter 16. The closeness shared during the previous night dissipated with the arrival of daylight. Claire and Jamie ate breakfast in silence, with a palpable discomfort hanging between them. They decided to take a walk through the hills behind the inn, attempting to break the tension with polite but nervous small talk. At the top of a hill, Claire sat on a log while Jamie settled on the ground, leaning against a nearby tree. The sounds of nature and the silence between them grew uncomfortable until Jamie, visibly nervous, tried to thank Claire for her kindness the night before. Though Jamie's words were awkward, his sincerity touched Claire, leading to an exchange where they began to ease the accumulated tension. Recognizing the unease, Jamie decided that the best way to connect was through physical contact, wrapping her in his arms and seeking warmth in her company. As they talked, Claire asked Jamie why he chose to stay with Dougal instead of returning home. After a brief hesitation, Jamie recounted the difficulties his sister Jenny faced after their father's death, compounded by the cruelties of Jack Randall. Dougal had informed him that Jenny had been violated by Randall and was pregnant, something Jamie couldn't bear to face, leading him to stay away. Jamie's story darkened further when he revealed that he had learned of a deserter named Horrocks who could testify that Jamie had not killed the sergeant at Fort William, a crime for which Jamie was wanted. The chance to clear his name was tempting, but he knew nothing was guaranteed. Concerned for Jamie's safety, Claire suggested that Dougal might be using him for his own ends, and Jamie confessed that there was indeed tension between him and his uncles, Colum and Dougal, who distrusted his intentions and feared he might claim leadership of the Mackenzie clan should Colum die. The conversation was abruptly interrupted by the sound of approaching horse hooves. With warrior instinct, Jamie hid with Claire to observe the group. It turned out to be the Watch, a known force in the Highlands, which reassured Jamie, although they decided to move away a bit further to avoid potential trouble. They climbed more hills, where the beauty of the landscape and the solitude offered them a break from the constant pressure. In the middle of a valley, Jamie taught Claire how to catch trout with bare hands, an art requiring patience and delicacy. This simple but intimate activity allowed them to reconnect, away from the morning's tension. Jamie even recited an old Gaelic love song, giving Claire a trout, a peculiar but tender gesture that made her smile. As they rested together, the conversation returned to Frank, and Jamie, with his usual perceptiveness, noticed Claire's inner struggle. Though Jamie tried to keep things light, the physical connection between them became increasingly evident, and Claire realized the undeniable attraction she felt for him. This moment of mutual honesty drew them closer, and Claire finally stopped resisting her own feelings. Later, after an emotionally charged day, they returned to the inn. The atmosphere was lively and bustling, with the men celebrating and joking. Claire, now more accustomed to the rough humor, joined in the festive mood. Jamie, with his sense of humor and skill in handling jests, kept the more enthusiastic ones in check. In the intimacy of the night, in their room, Jamie and Claire shared a deeper conversation about their lives, fears, and desires. Jamie, with a mix of humor and seriousness, continued to explore the mysteries surrounding Claire, trying to understand her origins and intentions. Though he still had no clear answers, his devotion to her was evident. The night ended on a note of lightness and complicity when Jamie, unbuttoning his shirt and handing his dagger to Claire, joked about the possibility of her killing him at any moment. This playful gesture, though symbolic, represented the total trust and surrender Jamie offered her. Claire, though bewildered by the intensity of her feelings for him, couldn't help but feel moved and drawn to the mix of vulnerability and strength Jamie displayed. Chapter 17. The next morning, Claire and Jamie woke up late, with the sun already high in the sky. They left the inn and headed south, finding the stable almost empty and with no sign of their companions. Jamie, jokingly, suggested that Rupert and the others had gone in the opposite direction of the Watch, probably to take advantage of the opportunity to steal cattle while the road was clear. The day continued with a vigorous walk across the moor until Claire remembered Horrocks, the English deserter who might help Jamie clear his name. Although Jamie was aware of the danger, he didn't plan to go to Lagcrum himself for fear of encountering Randall and the Watch, and considered sending Murtaugh instead. Curious, Claire asked about the relationship between Jamie and Murtaugh, and Jamie explained that Mert was a Fraser and an old friend he trusted completely. During their journey, they stopped to have lunch by a small pond surrounded by rocks. Jamie showed Claire a plover's nest and briefly captured a mother plover, stroking her tenderly before letting her go. He explained an old Scottish belief about the souls of young dead mothers inhabiting the bodies of these birds, which evoked memories of Jamie's own mother, who had died when he was only 8 years old. The warmth of the sun made them seek shade at the foot of a large rock. There, Jamie, with a mix of shyness and honesty, confessed his uncertainty about the intense feelings he experienced when he was with her, asking if what was happening between them was normal. Claire, also moved, replied that what they shared wasn't something ordinary. This mutual confession brought them even closer, and the intimacy between them deepened. Later, as they climbed a rock, Claire was startled by an arrow that grazed her head. Jamie reacted quickly, recognizing the arrow as the work of his friend Hugh Monroe, a man of singular appearance who had suffered terrible tortures at the hands of the Turks, including the loss of his tongue. Monroe, dressed in rags and carrying a leather sack, turned out to be an official beggar, authorized to beg in different districts. Monroe, using gestures, shared news with Jamie, including information about Horrocks. Through Monroe, Jamie planned to change the meeting place with the deserter to avoid Dougal's interference in his plans. After a brief conversation and an exchange of gifts, Monroe said goodbye, leaving Claire impressed by Jamie's extraordinary friends. When they returned to the inn, they found Dougal and his men already back. Dougal, observing Jamie, commented sarcastically that Jamie looked like a weary stag after the mating season, which provoked laughter among the group. Jamie, not in the mood for jokes, pushed Claire upstairs, avoiding dinner. That night, before sleeping, Jamie expressed his overwhelming desire for Claire, describing how, even after being with her, his longing only grew. This conversation led to a playful exchange of words and laughter between them, exploring both the passion and the spirituality of making love. The chapter ended with a mix of humor, tenderness, and shared desire, leaving Claire pondering whether that desire would ever be exhausted. Chapter 18. During a ride along a narrow path, Claire traveled accompanied by Dougal and Jamie. Upon learning of Captain Randall's reaction to her marriage, Claire felt a mix of relief and concern. Dougal, with his ever-sarcastic attitude, reassured her by explaining that Randall wouldn't retaliate due to the possible consequences with the powerful clans with whom Claire was now connected. 2 nights later, the group camped on a moor near a strange rock formation. After a warm dinner and an evening of songs and stories, Claire curled up with Jamie, but soon the camp's tranquility was interrupted. Jamie, always alert, sensed the presence of strangers nearby, and quickly, all the men in the camp began to discreetly prepare for a possible attack. It didn't take long before a group of raiders, likely from the Grant clan, burst from the rocks, intent on stealing horses and provisions. Claire hid in a crevice in the rocks, clutching the dagger Jamie had given her, while she watched the fight unfold. Jamie and Dougal fought back to back, using their swords with great skill. Murtaugh, Claire's silent protector, remained by her side, vigilant. Although the raiders managed to steal some horses and sacks of grain, the Mackenzie group emerged relatively unscathed, except for one man who was kidnapped, worrying Dougal about the cost of the ransom. The next morning, the group continued their journey, stopping in a nearby forest. There, Jamie and Rupert decided to teach Claire how to use her dagger, given the previous night's events had shown the need for her to defend herself. The instruction was thorough, though Claire initially felt clumsy and timid. Over time, and under Rupert's tutelage and the comments from the other men, she began to improve, although she found it difficult to pierce the tough skin of the makeshift dummy they used for practice. Moreover, Jamie denied her the opportunity to learn to shoot a musket, arguing that the weapon was too powerful for her, which left Claire somewhat frustrated. The session ended with dinner amid congratulations, though Murtagh, ever pragmatic, commented that poison was still, in his opinion, the best weapon for a woman. Dougal, in his characteristic style, added that while useful, poison had disadvantages in hand-to-hand combat. Chapter 19. In the next stop on their journey, Claire and the group camped on the shore of the mysterious Loch Ness, a place where time seemed to have halted. The surroundings were familiar to Claire, but now, in the height of summer, the colors were more intense and vibrant, from the deep blue of the sky to the golds and yellows of the flowers lining the landscape. Still, the lake's surface retained its dark reflection, with an air of stillness that seemed to hold ancient secrets. After setting up camp, Claire decided to enjoy a moment of solitude by the lake's edge. As she relaxed, she noticed a disturbing agitation in the water until a huge, scaly head emerged, accompanied by a long, sinuous neck. Claire watched in awe as the creature, a being as majestic as it was strange, surfaced, its dark blue skin with green iridescence shimmering under the sun. Its eyes, a bright amber color, stared at her intently, filled with ancient, distant wisdom. Instead of feeling fear, Claire felt a connection with the animal, as if both were out of their natural time. The creature, after a brief moment of stillness, submerged again into the lake's depths, leaving only a slight whirlpool on the surface as a trace of its existence. Claire remained on the shore a few seconds longer, silently bidding it farewell before returning to the camp. Climbing the slope, she encountered Peter, one of the cattlemen. The man, pale and visibly terrified, had witnessed the encounter with the creature. Holding his bucket, Peter was paralyzed with fear, believing he had seen something supernatural. Despite Claire's attempts to calm him, Peter was too scared, and she couldn't get him to approach the lake again. She accompanied him back to the camp, aware that the vision of the creature had left a deep mark on him. During dinner, Claire decided not to mention her experience to the others. Aware of the beliefs and superstitions of the men accompanying her, she preferred to keep the encounter to herself. However, Peter's disturbed gaze throughout the night reminded her that she hadn't been the only one to witness something out of the ordinary. Chapter 20. 2 days after the raid, the group resumed their journey north, approaching the anticipated meeting with Horrocks, an English deserter whose news was crucial to Jamie. Claire noticed Jamie's distraction, surely because he was worried about the importance of the information he might receive. The previous night, Claire had found a package next to her blanket, wrapped in fine paper and tied with a feather. Upon opening it, she discovered a piece of amber with the silhouette of a dragonfly trapped inside, accompanied by a message in Latin written by Hugh Monroe. Though the gift was an enigmatic gesture, the conversation that followed revealed Jamie's caution regarding the upcoming meeting with Horrocks, distrusting the deserter, but trusting Dougal's company to face any trap. Claire was surprised to learn that Dougal, or perhaps Rupert, had accidentally shot Jamie during a previous confrontation. This fact underscored the complex relationships between the Mackenzies and Jamie, where his life was in a precarious balance between loyalty and threat. Although Jamie had reasons to distrust his uncles, he also recognized that their support was crucial due to the strategic value of his lands in Lallybroch. This property, situated in a crucial mountain pass, was a resource the Mackenzies wanted to control in case of a new uprising. The journey continued, and in a secluded clearing off the road, Jamie suggested they take a break. However, his true purpose was more intimate. Despite Claire's concerns for safety, passion prevailed between them until they were violently interrupted. 2 English deserters appeared out of nowhere, one pointing a musket at Jamie's head while the other sinisterly expressed his intent to rape Claire. Desperate, Claire remembered Rupert's lessons on using the dagger, and when the man named Harry tried to overpower her, she managed to stab him in the back, ending his life. Jamie, seizing the distraction, killed the other deserter with his giant dhu. Shaken and trembling, Jamie and Claire sought comfort in each other, in an act of desperate union that, though driven by trauma, allowed them to regain their strength. Dougal's appearance, surprised and disgusted by the situation, caused Claire to burst into uncontrollable laughter, relieving the accumulated tension cathartically. After this episode, Claire became more cautious, not straying too far from the group. However, when the time came for the meeting with Horrocks, Jamie insisted on leaving her behind, hiding her in a nearby thicket to protect her from potential dangers. Claire, feeling insecure and anxious about being separated from Jamie, tried to resist but finally gave in to his insistence. Alone in the forest, Claire tried to distract herself by watching birds, but soon realized she was closer to Cray Na Dun than she had been in months. About 11 kilometers from the hill and the circle of stones, the opportunity to return to her time and Frank presented itself unexpectedly. Struggling with her feelings for Jamie, Claire decided to try to reach Cray Na Dun. She began to move along a stream, facing a series of challenges as she descended the slippery rocks. Despite the difficulties, she pressed on until a misstep made her fall into the water. On the verge of drowning, she was rescued by an outstretched hand. To her surprise and horror, it was the young Corporal Hawkins, whom she had met before, who saved her. Chapter 21. Claire found herself in Captain Randall's private office, seeking distractions to keep her fear at bay while awaiting his imminent arrival. Though she tried to stay calm, it was hard to ignore that she was trapped in the fortress with a man as dangerous as Randall. As she waited, Claire amused herself by observing the luxurious surroundings, but her mood darkened when Randall finally entered. The captain, noticing her disheveled appearance and the mess in his office, adopted a casual and almost mocking attitude. Sitting across from Claire, he quickly attempted to intimidate her, but Claire responded with insolence, challenging him despite the growing tension in the room. Intrigued by Claire, Randall observed her with a mix of interest and disdain, suggesting that she might have abandoned the Mackenzies voluntarily, or even be a French spy. However, Claire maintained her defiant stance, even as the situation became increasingly dangerous. Randall tried to steer the conversation towards physical intimidation, using a knife to cut Claire's clothes and began to insinuate a sexual assault. At that moment, though frightened, Claire tried to keep her composure, even playing her last card, mentioning the Duke of Sandringham, a name that momentarily unsettled Randall. However, the captain quickly regained control and, furious, tied Claire up and continued his harassment. Just when the situation seemed desperate, the office door opened and Jamie appeared in the window frame, gun in hand, demanding that Randall leave Claire alone. Although the situation was critical, with Randall threatening Claire with a knife, Jamie managed to stay calm, but Randall provoked him until Jamie was forced to drop his gun. At that moment, Jamie lunged at Randall, managing to disarm him and knock him out with a sharp blow. With the situation still dangerous, Jamie untied Claire and quickly guided her out of the office, escaping through a window. Despite the risk, they managed to flee the fort using a rope and rode away on horseback, leaving behind their English pursuers. Though the tension of the escape was palpable, Jamie remained calm as he led Claire to safety. As they rode toward the Macintosh Land's border, the atmosphere between them was tense. Claire, exhausted and frightened, realized that Jamie was angry, not only about what had happened, but also about her disobedience. When they finally stopped, Jamie couldn't contain his anger and frustration, confronting Claire with the mix of fear, anger, and pain he felt. Claire, equally furious, didn't stay silent, and they exchanged shouts filled with accusations. The tension between them reached a climax when Jamie confessed his anguish at having to see her in danger once again, especially after what had happened with the deserters. Both finally acknowledged that, though they had saved each other in extreme situations, the emotional wounds these events had left were deep. Despite the apologies and momentary relief, both Claire and Jamie knew that their words and experiences would leave scars on their relationship, scars that wouldn't be easy to heal. Chapter 22. Arriving in Doonesbury was a relief for everyone. They found an inn where Dougal, with evident pain, paid the innkeeper to ensure both his silence and a decent dinner. During the meal, Claire felt invisible, as if the men were punishing her with their indifference, except for Jamie, who barely spoke to her. Once in the room, Claire collapsed onto the bed, exhausted, expecting Jamie to join her for rest. However, Jamie seemed to have other plans. After a moment of silence, he told her they had an unresolved matter. Claire, with a growing sense of apprehension, tried to avoid the topic, but Jamie was direct. He was determined to punish her for disobeying his orders. Claire tried to resist, but knew that Jamie had the strength to impose his will if he wished. Finally, Jamie explained that his intention wasn't to hurt her for pleasure, but to teach her a lesson that would help her understand the seriousness of their situation. Despite her resistance, Claire understood that in this time and place, disobedience could have deadly consequences not only for her but for everyone. After a tense discussion, in which Jamie made it clear that for the good of both of them and the group, she had to be punished, Claire, though reluctant, accepted her fate. What followed was a painful moment, both physically and emotionally, where Claire felt the humiliation of being punished by someone who also protected and loved her. The next day, Claire felt too ashamed to face the others, but Jamie convinced her to hold her head high. Though the men made a few jokes about the incident, Claire noticed that the hostility from the previous night had vanished. It seemed that by being punished, she had regained the group's acceptance. During the march, Jamie tried to lighten the mood by telling stories of his childhood, confessing that he himself had been punished numerous times by his father. These stories, mixed with painful and humorous memories, helped Claire better understand Jamie and soothe her own anger. Along the way, the two began to restore mutual trust and affection. Jamie confessed that the episode with Randall had been traumatic not only because of the physical pain but also because of the humiliation and helplessness he had felt and how it had deeply scarred him. Claire, for her part, began to see the depth of the emotional scars Jamie carried and better understood his behavior. Finally, when Jamie asked her to share the bed again, Claire, though still upset, decided to forgive him, but not before warning him that if he ever raised a hand to her again, she would kill him. Jamie, in response, made a solemn vow, promising never to hurt her in that way again, sealing a truce and a new understanding in their relationship. Chapter 23. After an exhausting journey, Dougal waited outside the Red Boar Inn, noticeably impatient but satisfied to see that Claire, though exhausted, had endured the trip with bravery. After ensuring Jamie would take care of the horses, Dougal sent her to rest. Claire, so tired that she could barely stand, collapsed onto the bed the moment her head touched the pillow. However, she later awoke suddenly, remembering with anguish an unresolved matter: Horrocks, the deserter who could provide key information to clear Jamie's name. When she asked, Jamie revealed with a mix of exhaustion and resignation that Horrocks had spoken, but what he said was devastating. The person responsible for the sergeant major's murder was none other than Randall. This revelation closed all possibilities of clearing his name, as proving it would be impossible. As they discussed their options, Jamie mentioned that Dougal had received an urgent message from Colum. They needed to return to Leok immediately, as the arrival of an English nobleman, the Duke of Sandringham, was expected. This man had enough influence to potentially intervene in Jamie's case and perhaps secure an amnesty. Claire, though worried, accepted the new route to Leok. The journey back to the castle was grueling. Dougal, impatient to arrive before the Duke, set a frantic pace. By the time they crossed the castle gates, Claire was so tired that Jamie had to carry her in his arms to her room. There, barely able to stand, Claire collapsed onto the bed, grateful for the cleanliness and comfort that Mrs. Fitz had prepared for them. While Claire fought against exhaustion, Jamie excused himself to run an errand, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts. Despite her fatigue, she couldn't help but feel uneasy, especially as she recalled Leok, the young girl she had seen at the castle before marrying Jamie. The image of the girl, with her radiant expression upon seeing Jamie, filled Claire with jealousy and concern. When Jamie returned, Claire, still irritated, confronted him, asking if he had gone to see Leok. Jamie, somewhat confused, admitted that he had crossed paths with her on the stairs, but that their encounter had been casual. Even so, Claire couldn't help but express her insecurities, accusing him of marrying her only out of interest. Jamie, surprised and hurt by Claire's accusations, tried to explain that his relationship with Leok was not what she feared and that, although there were practical reasons for their marriage, they were not what Claire imagined. In a fit of frustration, Jamie revealed that he had gone out to buy a wedding ring for Claire, not to do business with Colum. Realizing her mistake, Claire felt ashamed and deeply regretful. Jamie handed her the ring, a symbol of his commitment, and offered her the option of living separately if that was what she desired. However, Claire, moved by the gesture and Jamie's sincere affection, accepted the ring, sealing their bond. What followed was an intense and passionate encounter between them, where repressed emotions and accumulated tensions erupted in an act of fierce and unrestrained love. Although at first it was a battle of wills, they ended up finding in each other a fusion of body and soul, leaving behind any doubts or resentment. The next day, Claire awoke with an aching body, but with a new understanding of the nature of her relationship with Jamie. Though their bodies bore the marks of their encounter, there was a new closeness and trust between them that promised to strengthen their bond despite the challenges that still awaited them at Leok. Part 4. A Whiff of Sulfur. Chapter 24. Dinner at the castle turned into an important occasion for Jamie and Claire, who received toasts and congratulations on their marriage. However, the festive atmosphere darkened when Jamie, after drinking heavily, stood up to leave for a moment. Claire stayed behind, observing the guests, including guileless Duncan and her husband Arthur, who looked sick and exhausted. Guileless, who sat beside Claire to avoid male conversations, seemed intrigued by Claire's relationship with Jamie, asking indiscreet questions about their sex life and suggesting that someone might want to poison her for marrying such a desirable man. Although somewhat puzzled, Claire didn't take her warnings seriously. Shortly after, Jamie reappeared, but his expression showed concern, ignoring even Claire and Guileless as he went to speak with Colum and Dougal. Seeing them together, sharing the same worried expression, Claire realized something serious had happened. Later, Jamie explained to Claire that Dougal had received news of his wife Mora's death from a sudden fever. Although Dougal's marriage didn't seem particularly close, Mora's death required his presence to settle matters at his estate. This led Jamie to reflect on the nature of arranged marriages compared to his own parents, who married for love, defying family expectations. Jamie and Claire shared a moment of closeness, where he expressed his desire for their marriage to also become something more than just an arrangement. Although Claire wanted to comfort him and assure him that there was more between them than a simple agreement, she knew she couldn't fully commit because of her loyalty and love for Frank, her husband in another time. This internal conflict kept her divided, unable to confess her true feelings to Jamie. Later, Jamie and Claire were interrupted by Alec McMahon, a rough-looking old man, who joked about Jamie's youth and sent him off to work in the stables, where Claire joined him later. There, Claire watched Jamie interact with Hamish, Colum's young son, who was trying to ride a dangerous horse named Donus. With patience and firmness, Jamie convinced Hamish that riding such an unruly horse wasn't wise and instead guided him to build confidence with a tamer horse. Throughout the night, Claire continued to feel the tension between her growing affection for Jamie and her loyalty to Frank. Jamie, unaware of her internal conflict, showed his affection for her in subtle but deep ways. Claire, though grateful for the relationship they were building, couldn't help but feel guilty for the love she still felt for Frank and the complexity of her situation. The next day, Claire found a small bundle of plants under her pillow, a symbol of ill omen that Jamie dismissed with irritation. Despite this unsettling discovery, the safety of Jamie's arms helped her sleep. In a moment of tranquility, Jamie reflected on the possibility of returning to Lallybroch, his home, although he knew they had to settle some matters at Leok first. Claire warned him not to trust the Duke of Sandringham, despite Jamie having had previous encounters with him. Though she didn't know exactly why, Claire felt the Duke represented a danger. Finally, while Jamie and Claire were together in the gardens, an incident with Father Bane and a pack of wild dogs showed Jamie's protective side. Despite the growing tension in the castle, Claire found moments of peace in her work, though she couldn't avoid feeling guilty about the conflicting emotions that tormented her. Claire finds herself hiding, eavesdropping on a conversation between brothers Colum and Dougal Mackenzie. Colum, with a calm but determined voice, expresses his plans to get rid of a woman he considers dangerous, suggesting she might be a witch. The tension between the brothers is palpable, though the conversation softens when Colum mentions sending Jamie hunting with the Duke, seeing it as an opportunity for the young man to obtain royal pardon. While listening, Claire observes Leok, a pale and nervous young woman who accidentally drops a cup, forcing her to flee hastily before Dougal and Colum leave the room. Unable to escape without being discovered, Claire picks up the fallen cup just as Dougal opens the door. Pretending to bring a remedy for Colum's hoarseness, she's invited to enter the library where, despite the recent argument, Colum is kind. While examining the books, Claire witnesses from the window an accident where Hamish, Colum's young nephew, falls from his horse. Colum, despite his physical limitations, quickly mobilizes to see what has happened, revealing his deep affection for the boy. Later, Claire reflects on Leok's situation, now pregnant with Dougal's child, and Jamie's imminent departure. Though worried about the loneliness she will feel in his absence, she finds comfort in their mutual love. At dinner, while Claire observes the various diners and their ethnic diversity, a conversation about the Duke of Sandringham reveals uncomfortable details about his inappropriate interest in young men like Jamie. One day, Claire is called to assist with the birth of a mare. Despite her initial nervousness, she manages to turn the foal to ensure it is born safely, demonstrating an unexpected skill in a chaotic environment under the pressure of the men watching her. After the successful birth, she feels euphoric and satisfied with her achievement. As life at the castle continues, Claire and Jamie enjoy a deep and passionate connection, though both feel the sadness of the imminent separation due to Jamie's journey. He promises to be careful but also warns her to stay away from Gilus Duncan, about whom rumors of witchcraft are circulating. Unease grows when, while gathering herbs with Gilus, Claire discovers an abandoned child on a hill, apparently left there for the fairies to exchange him for a stolen human. Gilus, terrified, forbids Claire from touching the child, claiming she could be accused of his death if something goes wrong. Despite her desire to help, Claire ultimately accepts the reality that Gilus presents to her. The arrival of Duke Sandringham at the castle brings a tense atmosphere. Though Sandringham presents himself as a vigorous and sociable man, Claire and Jamie cannot help but remember the stories about his preferences and the unwanted attention Jamie suffered in his youth. Amid these events, Claire remains intrigued by the curse found in her bed and accepts Gilas's offer to discover who sent it. However, during an attempt at an invocation in Gilas's attic, the session is abruptly interrupted, leaving Claire with more questions than answers. Finally, during a banquet in honor of the Duke, Arthur Duncan, Gilas's husband, suddenly dies during dinner, causing shock among those present. Claire tries to revive him without success, only increasing the suspicions surrounding Gilas. The chapter concludes with Jamie's departure for the hunt, leaving Claire to face her own fears and the growing tension in the castle as suspicions, rumors, and secrets begin to intertwine dangerously. Chapter 25. Claire finds herself trapped in a dark and foul-smelling pit, unaware of what large creature is breathing near her. She soon discovers she is not alone. Gilas Duncan is also there. The two women comfort each other as they try to understand their situation. Gilas reveals that they are in the Thieves' Hole, a place of punishment for criminals, and that they have been accused of witchcraft. As they spend the night in that cold and damp place, Claire asks how long they'll be there, and Gilas explains that they are waiting for the ecclesiastical court, who will judge their supposed crimes. During the conversation, Gilas tells Claire that she has been poisoning her husband, Arthur Duncan, with arsenic, and admits she did it because she is pregnant by Dougal Mackenzie, the brother of the clan leader, Colm Mackenzie. Gilas confesses that she doesn't care that the evidence incriminates her, as she knows they want to kill them no matter the outcome. The conversation takes a darker turn when Gilas reveals that her goal is not just her love for Dougal, but also her loyalty to the Jacobite cause, having sent large sums of money to support the uprising in favor of Prince Charles. Finally, the ecclesiastical court arrives, and the women are taken to trial in the town square. The judges accuse them of various crimes, including Arthur Duncan's death and a child's illness. The testimonies against them pile up, and Claire realizes she is trapped in a trial organized by Colm Mackenzie with the sole purpose of condemning Gilas. When all seems lost, Father Bain, a priest with whom Claire had previously had a confrontation, appears and testifies against her, claiming that she cursed him, which almost cost him his life. His testimony fuels the crowd's fury, but just then, Ned Gowan, the clan's lawyer, arrives to defend Claire. Ned tries to discredit the accusations, but the court is determined to proceed with the condemnation. The situation reaches a critical point when Claire and Gilas are taken to the lake's shore to undergo the water test, a brutal method where the accused is tied and thrown into the water. However, before they can proceed, Jamie appears to save Claire, creating a distraction that allows him to free her. Gilas, in an act of sacrifice, confesses to being a witch to save Claire, revealing her pregnancy by tearing her dress, which shocks the crowd and judges. While Gilas accepts her fate, Jamie and Claire take advantage of the confusion to escape. After their dramatic escape, Claire, still in shock, faces the reality of her situation and confesses to Jamie her true origin. She tells him she comes from the future, from the year 1945, and reveals everything she knows about Scotland's future and the fate of the clans. Jamie, surprised but determined, takes her back to Cray Naudun, where Claire could return to her own time. However, at the last moment, Claire chooses to stay with Jamie, giving up the chance to return to her old world. Together, Jamie and Claire leave Cray Naudun and head to Lallybroch, Jamie's home, determined to face whatever comes next, as Claire accepts that her place is by Jamie's side in this new life they have built together. Part 5. Lallybroch. Chapter 26. Claire and Jamie Fraser enjoy a moment of peace as they ride together away from Leok. Despite the difficulties they know they face, the happiness of being together makes up for everything. The conversation flows, first about the landscape they're crossing and then, more cautiously, about Claire's world, her memories of a future time that to Jamie seem like fairy tales. They also talk about the recent events at the castle, and though Jamie shows his admiration for the Duke, both are aware that they cannot trust anyone. The conversation turns more serious when Claire mentions Gillis Duncan and the terrible possibility that she might be burned for witchcraft. She shows Jamie the scar from a vaccination, making him realize that Gillis might also be a time traveler, though they will never know for sure. Jamie comforts her, assuring her that she need not worry about Gillis, as she is a dangerous woman who killed her husband. As they approach Brock Twarrock, Jamie's estate, they encounter a man named Jock Graham, who recognizes them and is surprised to see them. Graham, with a respectful welcome home, departs, leaving Jamie and Claire to continue their journey to the house. Upon arrival, a group of dogs greets them with barks, but Jamie, with firm yet affectionate command, quickly controls them, showing he is still the master. Arriving at Lallybroch is both a blessing and a challenge. The mansion is impressive, surrounded by smaller buildings and an old tower that gives the estate its name. But the real shock comes when they meet Jenny, Jamie's sister. The initial excitement of the reunion mixes with palpable tension when Jamie discovers his sister is pregnant and has a young child, leading him to mistakenly assume that Jenny has been dishonored by Captain Randall. Jamie, overcome with pain and confusion, accuses Jenny of being Randall's lover, triggering a fierce argument between the siblings. Jenny, hurt by Jamie's accusations, reveals that she married Ian Murray, who is the father of her children. Ian, despite his humble appearance with a wooden leg, proves to be a man of great dignity and humor, helping to calm the situation between the siblings. As Jamie struggles with feelings of guilt and remorse, Jenny confronts him with the truth, reminding him of her sacrifice to save him, even if it meant putting her honor at risk. The confrontation between the siblings finally reaches a point of reconciliation when Jamie realizes his mistake and apologizes. Jenny, despite her strength, shows her vulnerability as she speaks of the tears she shed every day since Jamie was taken prisoner. In the end, they embrace, restoring the bond they've always shared, though now with a new mutual understanding. Chapter 27. After a deep night's rest at Lallybroch, Claire and Jamie wake up to the bustle of the house, a sign that the day has started late. After a comforting breakfast, Jamie and Ian prepare for their tasks on the estate, while Jenny stays home with Claire. Before leaving, Ian, with his usual good humor, offers to bring Jenny apples from the orchard, prompting a small exchange of jokes, demonstrating the closeness and affection within the family. Jenny and Claire spend the day together in the parlor while the men are away. Their conversation is cautious, but filled with powerful subtext. Both women, linked to Jamie, are evaluating each other, weighing their roles in his life. Jenny, who has carried the responsibility of the house and family since her mother's death, watches closely the woman now sharing her brother's life. Claire, for her part, shows that her union with Jamie is based on love, not interest, something Jenny eventually seems to accept, at least partially. As the afternoon progresses, Claire and Jenny go to find little Jamie, who has once again escaped. They find him in the gazebo, under the watchful eye of his uncle Jamie, who is lovingly teaching him not to wet his feet while learning to use the potty. The scene, both tender and comical, highlights Jamie's affection and patience towards his nephew, as well as his ability to involve himself in the small details of family life. Later, Jamie shows Claire the house, a mansion built in 1702, equipped with modern innovations for the time. During the tour, Claire pauses at a portrait of Jenny as a child, surrounded by birds, a work painted by her mother. This portrait evokes memories in Jamie, who compares her to the pheasant in the painting, a display of his fraternal love and sense of humor. Then, Claire contemplates another portrait of Jamie and his brother Willie, a red-haired boy who died of smallpox at 11. This painting awakens painful memories in Jamie of his childhood and the close relationship he had with his older brother, whom he idolized. It is in this context of nostalgia and reflection that Jamie reveals to Claire the real reason he married her, the desire he felt from the first moment he saw her. This confession surprises Claire but also strengthens the bond between them, showing that their union was much more than a matter of survival or convenience. The chapter culminates in a moment of tenderness and passion. Claire and Jamie, wrapped in a shared cloak, find themselves enveloped in the stillness of twilight. Amid this calm, they confess their love and mutual desire. Jamie, unable to resist any longer, suggests taking Claire to a nearby hayloft, a promise of intimacy in a secluded place, symbolizing their deepening and growing love. Chapter 28. Claire began to find her place in the daily life of Lallybroch, taking on new responsibilities, especially visiting the tenants in the farthest cottages, bringing food and medicine, and offering advice to improve health and hygiene. Her relationship with the inhabitants of Lallybroch solidified, while Jamie, in his effort to get the estate in order before his inevitable departure, was always on the move, ensuring everything was under control. One morning, Jamie announced his intention to go see a horse he was interested in, but he was diverted to the mill as Ian informed him that the wheel wasn't working. Claire accompanied him, enjoying the splendid autumn day while gathering medicinal plants. During the walk, their conversation was a mix of jokes and personal memories, further strengthening their bond. Jamie recalled with tenderness and humor his first romantic experiences, from a first kiss to the strict lessons of responsibility his father instilled in him. Upon reaching the mill, Jamie realized he would have to dive into the cold pool to unclog the wheel. To do so, he stripped down to just a pair of red flannel drawers, noticeably mended, which turned out to be a garment inherited from his father. Claire, unable to contain her laughter, accompanied him as he, with dignity, waded into the water to solve the problem. While Jamie worked in the pool, an old woman known as Mrs. McNabb appeared and struck up a conversation with Claire. The woman, strong-willed and outspoken, took the opportunity to ask Claire for a favor, that Jamie employ her grandson Robbie as a stable boy to keep him away from his abusive father. Claire, surprised by the old woman's frankness and shrewdness, listened attentively, though her attention was diverted when she saw a group of English dragoons descending toward the mill. Tension rose as the dragoons, unaware of Jamie's presence in the pool, began inspecting the wheel. Just as one of them was about to dive in, the mill's wheel suddenly freed itself and began to spin. As it did, a soaked garment emerged from the water, Jamie's drawers. The soldiers, ignorant of the danger they had almost uncovered, took the garment as a souvenir, leaving Jamie hidden in the pool. Finally, when the dragoons left, Jamie emerged from the water, shivering with cold and somewhat furious at the situation, but grateful to have avoided danger. Mrs. McNabb, with great dignity, reminded him of her request as he struggled to maintain composure, asking her in return to hand him back his shirt to avoid freezing. Chapter 29. At night, after dinner, the family would usually gather in the parlor to chat. Claire told Jenny and Ian about the encounter with Mrs. McNabb and the Redcoats, provoking laughter with her imitation of the old woman. The conversation veered into the childhood pranks of Jamie and Ian, who grew up together at Lallybroch. They recalled how, on more than one occasion, they found themselves trying to explain their mischief to their respective fathers, only to end up being punished together. Ian mentioned the time Jamie tried to convince his father, Brian, that corporal punishment was a barbaric and outdated practice, which only led to both of them having to clean the old stone tower from top to bottom as punishment. While enjoying port and biscuits, Ian recounted how he married Jenny without Jamie's consent. Although Jamie couldn't give his blessing because he was absent, he assured Ian that he couldn't have found a better husband for his sister. Ian shared how overwhelmed he felt when Jenny practically dragged him to the altar, and they both laughed remembering those moments. However, the atmosphere became more serious when Jenny confessed to Jamie her guilt over what happened with Randall and their father's death. She told how, in her attempt to defend herself from Randall, she ridiculed him, likely increasing the English captain's fury towards Jamie. Jamie consoled her, assuring her that she wasn't to blame and that Randall was there to cause harm regardless. Jenny, full of guilt and sadness, asked for forgiveness, but Jamie reassured her that the only thing that mattered was that they were now together and safe. Later, in bed, Claire and Jamie talked about his past and how Jamie had learned from his father. Jamie shared one of the last lessons he received from him, a mix of discipline and affection that shaped his character. Despite the difficulties they faced, the love and respect for his father were evident in the stories Jamie shared. The conversation ended with a touch of tenderness as Jamie assured Claire that his father would have approved of and loved her, highlighting the importance she had in his life. Chapter 30. The tension between Jenny and Ian seemed to have dissipated after the emotional confession the previous night. As the family gathered in the parlor after dinner, Claire busied herself copying the recipes Jenny had given her during the day. The room was lit by an oil lamp, creating a warm and cozy atmosphere. Ian and Jamie were in a corner, discussing farm matters while sharing a bottle of elderberry wine. Intrigued by the details of life at Lallybroch, Claire asked Jenny how long it took to make candles. Jenny, resting her swollen feet on a stool, responded in detail, demonstrating her expertise in household tasks. As they spoke, Jenny's belly moved visibly, showing the activity of the baby within her. Fascinated, Claire accepted Jenny's invitation to feel the baby's kicks, amazed by the strength of the little one. Jamie, curious, joined the conversation, asking his sister what it felt like to be pregnant. Jenny described the sensations in detail, from the baby's movements to the sensitivity in her body, explaining how it was a feeling of fullness and connection. The conversation between Jenny and Ian took on an intimate tone, filled with promises and shared memories. The latent sensuality in the air intensified as Jenny described how, in the final days of pregnancy, the baby's movements felt as though the man was inside her, creating a profound connection between the act of love and the creation of life. When Jenny and Ian retired, Claire and Jamie were left alone by the fire. Seeing little Jamie asleep in a corner, Jamie suggested leaving him there since his parents clearly wanted to be alone. The conversation between Claire and Jamie became more intimate, exploring ideas about the male desire to return to the womb and the nature of love and procreation. As they cuddled on the cushions by the fire, Jamie confessed that, although he didn't think about these things when making love to Claire, there was some truth in Jenny's words. The idea of returning to a safe place and merging with the other was a deep, perhaps unattainable, desire, but at least they could give that gift to their children, even if only for a time. As the night progressed, in the warmth of the home, their connection grew stronger, reinforced by love and mutual understanding. While Jamie tried to downplay his reflections, blaming the wine for his sentimentality, Claire let herself be carried away by the moment, enjoying the closeness and shared intimacy. Chapter 31. Payday at Lallybroch began with a soft knock on the door. Jenny entered the room, bringing a blue shirt and a hat for Jamie. She looked at her brother with a critical eye, noticing that his shoulders had broadened a bit since the last time she saw him. Without wasting time, She made him sit on a stool by the window to fix his hair, which was full of leaves and thistles. Though Jamie complained, Jenny insisted that he present himself decently to the tenants who were coming to pay their rents. After untangling and brushing his hair, she skillfully braided it and, despite Jamie's resistance, tied the braid with a silk ribbon that matched his eyes. Finally, after some protests and jokes, Jamie was ready with a neat appearance. Jenny then turned to help Claire prepare for the day. Claire wore a beautiful copper silk dress that had been made for her on the estate. After removing some oak leaves from her hair as well, Jenny placed a lace cap on her head and suggested adding some jewelry. Jamie then remembered that Myrta had brought the wedding pearls from Leok, and Claire felt excited to have them back. While Jamie went downstairs to greet the tenants, Claire and Jenny remained in the room, going through a box of family jewelry and mementos. Jenny shared stories of her mother and grandmother, showing Claire some ivory bracelets that matched her dress perfectly. In the kitchen, Myrta was eating while Jenny and Mrs. Crook bustled around, supervising the preparation of food for the tenants. Myrta had brought some of Claire's belongings from Leok, including her prized medicinal plants, filling her with gratitude. As the day progressed, the estate buzzed with activity. The tenants arrived, paid their rents, and stayed to enjoy Lallybroch's hospitality. Jamie retreated to his study to discuss farm matters with each tenant, while Claire helped with the small details, talking with the tenants and observing life on the estate. Finally, Ronald McNabb arrived with his son Rabbie. Ronald, just as Granny McNabb had described, looked disheveled and dirty, and little Rabbie was in no better condition. While Jamie spoke with Ronald, Jenny and Claire took Rabbie to the kitchen, where they realized the boy had been abused by his father. Despite Ronald's initial refusal to let his son work on the estate, Jamie resolved the situation decisively, ensuring that Rabbie would stay at Lallybroch. At the end of the day, as the sun set, Jamie and Claire sat on a fence behind the house, contemplating the expanse of the farm. They reflected on the day and their life together. Claire expressed her love for Jamie, who in turn confessed that he had loved her since the first time he comforted her at Leok. Night fell, but the warmth of their love enveloped them, making the approaching winter's cold feel distant. Chapter 32. One afternoon, while Claire was pulling up tubers on the hill behind the house, Jamie approached her, his hair wet and his shirt still tied between his legs after a long day of harvesting. They embraced, sharing a quiet moment as the sun set, until Jenny's voice called from the house, reminding them it was time for dinner. Despite the happiness they felt at Lallybroch, Jamie confessed to Claire that they had to leave soon, perhaps the next day or the day after, as the redcoats were near and they couldn't stay much longer. However, that night they couldn't depart. In the middle of the night, Ian woke Jamie and Claire with the news that Jenny had gone into labor. Despite the urgency of the moment, Jenny remained calm, though the contractions were intensifying. Jamie went to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Martins, while Claire stayed with Jenny in her room, helping her walk to ease the contractions. Mrs. Martins, a tall, slender woman, arrived and took control of the situation with confidence. Despite the increasing pain and apparent lack of progress, Jenny stayed strong. Claire watched anxiously as the contractions intensified without the baby being born. The midwife tried several times to turn the baby within Jenny's womb, causing pain, but eventually succeeded. The birth was arduous, but finally, with the help of the midwife and Claire, Jenny gave birth to a baby girl, Margaret Ellen Murray. While Jenny recovered, Claire went to find Ian to give him the news. Finding him despondent and fearing the worst, she reassured him by informing him of the birth of his daughter. After the delivery, the Fraser and Murray families gathered to celebrate. Ian, full of reverence, held his daughter in his arms, while little Jamie snuggled next to his mother in bed. Jamie, who had shown skill in holding the newborn, handed her back to Jenny, who gently rocked her while humming lullabies. Back in their room, Claire and Jamie shared a moment of intimacy and reflection. Jamie, aware of the risks that came with the life they led, confessed that although he had initially regretted the possibility that Claire might not be able to have children, he now felt a certain relief at the thought of how she might suffer during childbirth. The chapter concluded with Jamie admitting that while he could endure his own pain, he couldn't bear to see Claire suffer, demonstrating the depth of his love and concern for her. Chapter 33. Jenny, despite having recently given birth, was determined to resume her daily activities almost immediately. Although she initially limited herself to supervising from the sofa, she soon began moving around the house and garden, caring for her newborn daughter, Margaret, while performing light tasks. One morning, while Claire was doing the laundry, little Jamie played around her, causing more mischief than help. Jenny, as energetic as ever, scolded him firmly when his behavior became dangerous, showing herself as a strict but loving mother. However, their peaceful routine was abruptly interrupted when Ian appeared, badly injured and without his wooden leg. He brought alarming news. The watch had captured Jamie near the mill and were taking him to Killen. Without wasting time, Jenny ordered Claire to tend to Ian while she prepared to go after her brother. Despite Claire's objections about leaving her baby, Jenny was determined not to let the English get away with it. The two women, accompanied by Ian, reached the ambush site as night was falling. Jenny, with impressive skill, followed tracks that led them to where Jamie might have been taken. However, the trail was lost in the darkness, forcing them to camp and wait until dawn. Jenny shared with Claire how, since childhood, she had learned from her brother and Ian useful skills for survival, skills that were now being put to the test as they tried to find Jamie. The next day, they managed to locate the watch at a river ford. Claire, filled with worry, asked Jenny if Jamie might be dead, but Jenny, trusting in her brother's cunning, believed otherwise. Determined to get answers, Jenny and Claire ambushed one of the straggling guards, whom Jenny didn't hesitate to interrogate severely. The man revealed that Jamie had tried to escape by throwing himself into the river, but they assumed he was dead after he disappeared into the deep waters. Undeterred, Jenny continued searching for traces of her brother and eventually found a sign, a leather strap stained with blood. This confirmed that Jamie was alive, though injured. However, tracking him became increasingly difficult, and although they found signs that he had rested nearby, they couldn't locate him. As the search progressed, Jenny showed signs of exhaustion. Claire, concerned for her health and the baby she had left at home, insisted that she should return to Lallybroch. Jenny finally agreed, though reluctantly, knowing she couldn't be away from her daughter for much longer. Back at camp, Claire met Murtagh, who had been sent by Ian to help with the search. Jenny, confident that Murtagh would take care of Claire, decided to return home. Before leaving, Jenny gave Claire a bag of money and a dagger, urging her never to remove the small weapon from her leg. In a moment of confidences, Jenny asked Claire if she had any warnings or advice, to which Claire, using her knowledge of the future, suggested that she plant potatoes and prepare for hard times to come. The chapter ended with Jenny and Claire saying goodbye atop a hill, both aware of the dangers ahead and the firm determination to find Jamie and bring him back home. Part 6. The Search. Chapter 34. As Claire reflected on the disadvantages of life in the Scottish Highlands, she lamented the lack of modern technology like phones and newspapers, which would make finding Jamie much easier. Without these methods, communication relied on word of mouth, meaning it could take weeks before anyone at Lallybroch knew of his whereabouts. Winter was approaching, which would further complicate any attempts to search for him. Murtagh, always pragmatic, suggested they let Jamie find them by using Claire's reputation as a healer to attract attention in the villages they passed through. During their journey, They stopped in every town so that Claire could tend to the sick while Murtaugh made sure everyone knew where they were headed. Additionally, he taught Claire some songs so they could perform together in taverns, which increased their notoriety. As their fame grew, so did their hope that Jamie would hear about their journey. However, the weather worsened, and they still had no news of him. One day, they came across a gypsy camp. Murtaugh, though distrustful, decided to trust them with the search for Jamie, describing him in detail. The gypsies promised to send a messenger if they found him. 2 days later, a messenger arrived and took Claire to a secluded place. After a tense journey, Claire was led to a cave where, to her surprise, she came face to face with Dougal Mackenzie, not Jamie. Dougal, always shrouded in mystery, revealed that Jamie had been captured and taken to Wentworth Prison, where he had been sentenced to hang. The news hit Claire like a bucket of cold water, but Dougal was adamant that there was nothing they could do to save Jamie. In an attempt to convince her, Dougal expressed his compassion for Jamie and his desire to protect Claire. He even offered to take her to his own home, but his intentions soon became clear. He wanted to marry her to ensure that Lallybroch would pass into his hands. Claire, outraged, accused him of trying to manipulate her and betray Jamie. The tension rose when Dougal tried to seduce her, insinuating that she could bear him a child. Claire, however, kept her composure, using the information she had gathered about Dougal and his secret relationship with Letitia, Colum's wife, to keep him at bay. When Dougal finally admitted his guilt, Claire felt a moment of triumph, but knew she was in a delicate situation. The arrival of Murtaugh, armed and ready to protect Claire, interrupted the confrontation. Dougal, resigned, agreed to let Claire try to persuade his men to help her rescue Jamie. In the end, 5 men decided to join the dangerous mission, with Rupert leading the group. The journey to Wentworth was arduous, with winter looming and fatigue taking its toll on Claire. Along the way, she remembered Dougal's last words, a message from Gillis Duncan. Dougal had relayed the woman's words, "I believe it's possible, but I don't know," followed by the numbers 1, 9, 6, and 7, which Claire interpreted as 1967, the year Gillis had traveled to the past. This discovery rekindled sadness in Claire, but she couldn't afford to think about returning to her time. She had to focus on Jamie. Finally, they arrived at Wentworth, where the imposing prison building awaited them. Dougal's words echoed in Claire's mind as she observed the granite walls. Not for much longer. She knew that if they failed, Dougal would see to it that they were buried alongside Jamie. With determination, Claire and Murtaugh prepared to face the greatest challenge of their lives. Part 7. The Sanctuary. Chapter 35. In the grim Wentworth prison, Sir Fletcher Gordon, a short, corpulent man with a tightly fitted waistcoat and rosy skin, meticulously reviewed the documents on his desk. His bright blue eyes settled on a crucial paper, the execution order for James Fraser, scheduled for December 23rd, in 2 days. Claire Beecham, pretending to be an English friend of the Frasers, felt a rush of emotions as she heard the confirmation that Jamie was still alive. Though she requested to see Jamie to deliver a message, Sir Fletcher, while not insensitive, denied the request due to the prisoner's danger and the prison's limitations. However, in a gesture of apparent kindness, Sir Fletcher handed Claire a box containing Jamie's personal effects, including small items that spoke to the humble and resilient life of their owner. Upon leaving, Claire, accompanied by Murtaugh disguised as a stable boy, was overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, vomiting into the snow. But Murtaugh, Rupert, and the other men with Claire did not give up. They discussed a plan to rescue Jamie, seizing on the idea that he might want to write a letter to his family. The next day, Claire returned to the prison with a package under the pretense of delivering a gift to Sir Fletcher. Inside the office, Murtaugh had knocked the guard unconscious, And although he didn't find a map of the prison, he did manage to get the keys to the cells. Bravely, Claire continued her mission, walking through the prison's dark corridors until she found the West Wing, where Jamie was being held. In the central cell, Claire made her way through the prisoners only to discover that Jamie had been taken by the cruel Captain Randall. Knowing there was no time to waste, Claire followed her instincts, confronting a guard whom she killed in self-defense, and rushed to find Jamie, dodging other prisoners and evading soldiers. Finally, she arrived at a private room where she found Jamie chained and in a deplorable physical state. Randall had crushed his hand as punishment. Despite his pain, Jamie tried to maintain composure as Claire attempted to free him. However, they were caught by Randall, who had perverse intentions. In a desperate act, Jamie offered his body in exchange for Claire's freedom, vowing not to resist or betray Randall if she were released. Randall agreed, but not before brutally nailing Jamie's hand to the table with a spike. Claire, powerless and devastated, was escorted out of the prison, where she took the opportunity to curse Randall, predicting his future death. Outside, Claire was thrown into a pit filled with snow and the bodies of prisoners. Face to face with a hungry wolf, Claire fought fiercely for her life, killing the animal with her bare hands. Exhausted and on the verge of collapse, she was rescued at the last moment by a stranger who found her in the snow and took her to safety. Chapter 36. Claire, exhausted and frightened, was taken to a dark cabin where she met a burly man wrapped in a bearskin cloak, who turned out to be Mac Rannoch, the owner of the lands they were on. At first, Claire feared revealing her English origin, but she decided to be honest and explained her situation, mentioning that her husband, Jamie Fraser, was imprisoned at Wentworth. Although Mac Rannoch was initially distrustful, Claire tried to convince him to help her rescue Jamie. The situation became more tense when Murtagh, one of Jamie's companions, was brought to the cabin by another of Mac Rannoch's men. After a brief conversation, Murtagh identified Mac Rannoch, recalling a meeting they had decades ago at a gathering at Castle Leok. This recognition created a connection between them, and Mac Rannoch finally agreed to consider helping, though he remained reluctant due to the risks involved. Claire took out the pearls that Jamie had given her on their wedding day and offered them as payment to Mac Rannoch. When he saw them, he was deeply moved, remembering that they were a gift he had given to Ellen Mackenzie, Jamie's mother, with whom he had been in love. This discovery seemed to sway Mac Rannoch toward helping, but he still struggled with the decision due to the dangers to his family and lands. As the night progressed, Mac Rannoch left the cabin, leaving Claire with Murtagh. He revealed that Rupert and other men were using Mac Rannoch's cattle as part of a plan to break into the prison and rescue Jamie. The men, led by Rupert, drove the cattle through a trench to the prison's back gate, creating chaos and distraction among the guards. Finally, after much tension, Jamie was rescued. Claire saw him arrive at the cabin but was horrified by his condition. He was severely injured and nearly unconscious. Back at Mac Rannoch's house, Claire set about healing Jamie, aided by Sir Marcus and Lady Annabelle, who provided them with all the resources they needed. Jamie was so badly wounded that Claire feared for his life, but with great effort, she managed to stabilize him. While Claire cared for Jamie, he began to open up about the torture and humiliation he had suffered at the hands of Captain Randall. He spoke of how Randall had broken him, driving him to wish for death. The conversation between Jamie and Claire was intense, revealing the deep emotional anguish Jamie was experiencing. However, even in his vulnerable state, Jamie maintained his sense of humor and made light of the situation. The chapter ended with Claire trying to comfort Jamie, cuddling up to him in bed to keep him warm, while he, between sleep and pain, wondered who John Wayne was, a sign of how pain and intimacy were intertwined in their relationship. Chapter 37. The next morning, Jamie woke up in better condition, although the bruises on his face had darkened, giving him an even more battered appearance. Despite the pain, he insisted on getting up, and along with Claire and Myrta, prepared to leave Elridge Manor before the English soldiers could launch a search from Wentworth Prison. Well bundled up against the cold and snow, the three headed toward Dingwall, where they hoped to cross the canal. Myrta and Jamie carried concealed weapons, while Claire was also armed with a dagger, ready for any emergency. The snow was treacherous, slowing the horses and making the journey even more exhausting for Jamie, who was barely able to stay on his mount due to his injuries. As they approached Wentworth Castle, the danger increased. They encountered a patrol of 4 English soldiers who, upon seeing Jamie's weakened state, grew suspicious and began asking questions. Myrta, with his typical cunning, tried to divert their attention, but the soldiers insisted on knowing more. Jamie, weakened but determined, fired first, killing the corporal before he could react. The situation escalated when one of the soldiers tried to flee to alert the prison. Claire, showing her growing strength and resolve, pursued him on horseback. Although she managed to shoot and wound the soldier, she faced the difficult dilemma of what to do with him. Finally, Claire made the decision to kill him quickly to prevent him from revealing their position. After the confrontation, the group continued their march toward the coast. On board the Christabel, a ship that would take them to France, Jamie suffered terribly from seasickness, worsening his already precarious state of health. Myrta and Claire, desperate to keep him alive, resorted to forcing him to take laudanum to ease his suffering, despite Jamie initially resisting, fearing that the sedative would leave him defenseless. Finally, after hours of torment and struggle at sea, the group reached the French coast. Jamie was carried unconscious by 2 monks to the Abbey of Saint and de Beaupré, where they hoped he could recover under the care of the religious. Chapter 38. The Abbey of Saint and de Beaupré, an imposing 12th century building, had been originally designed to withstand the assaults of both storms and invaders. In more peaceful times, its walls remained open, and the ancient cells had been transformed into welcoming rooms. Claire, exhausted and unsure of how she should behave in front of the abbot, opted for a polite curtsy when greeted by Abbot Alexander, a short, corpulent man who shared some facial features with his nephew Jamie, though with a more reserved expression. The abbot received her courteously, informing her that Brother Ambrose was in charge of caring for Jamie, assuring her that he was in good hands. After exchanging a few words with the abbot, Claire found herself so exhausted that she collapsed into bed, falling asleep almost immediately, overwhelmed by the exhaustion and tension of the past few days. Later, Claire woke from a terrifying nightmare in which she heard Jamie's screams behind an impenetrable wall. Realizing that the screams were real, she rushed to Jamie's room, where a monk was holding him as he trembled and sweated, clearly affected by a nightmare. The scent of lavender, associated in Jamie's mind with his torturer, Captain Jonathan Randall, disturbed him deeply. Claire ensured that the monk removed the perfumed oil, which slightly calmed Jamie, though he continued to suffer. The next day, Claire woke feeling more rested, but found Jamie in an emotionally fragile and physically weak state. He was easily irritated and rejected any attempt by Claire to help him. Though he apologized for his behavior, he remained reluctant to eat or receive treatment, which deeply concerned Claire. Throughout the day, she tried to keep him occupied, but Jamie showed no interest in anything, preferring to stay in bed and read in silence. While Jamie retreated into his pain, Claire sought comfort and distraction in the company of Father Anselm, a visiting Franciscan at the Abbey. Father Anselm, a kind and free-spirited man, guided Claire on a tour of the Abbey, showing her the impressive library and sharing his faith with her in a simple and understanding way. Although Claire considered herself an atheist, Anselm invited her to join him in the chapel for night worship, an experience that, though strange to her, left her feeling more at peace. Back in Jamie's room, Claire found her husband still awake, tormented by nightmares. Despite her attempts to help him, Jamie insisted on facing his pain alone, rejecting both food and rest. Claire watched with growing anguish as his physical and mental state deteriorated, unable to relieve his suffering. Finally, Claire accepted Father Anselm's invitation to join him in the chapel during the night. In the quiet atmosphere of the chapel, Claire found herself reflecting on the concept of eternity and the nature of absolute love. The experience comforted her, and although she initially doubted her ability to provide company to the sacrament, she realized that, at least in that moment, she was not alone. Chapter 39. The next morning, Claire headed as usual to Jamie's room, hoping to find him better. However, Murtaugh intercepted her, informing her that Jamie didn't want to see her. Puzzled and worried, Claire insisted on knowing what was going on. Murtaugh, visibly uncomfortable, explained that Jamie had decided it was best for her to return to Scotland and leave him at the Abbey. Unwilling to accept this decision, Claire ignored the warning and entered Jamie's room. As she approached, she found Jamie dozing, his face marked by fatigue and the torment of nightmares. When she touched him, Jamie reacted abruptly and pulled his hand away. Despite this, Claire insisted that they needed to talk. After a tense silence, Jamie, filled with despair, confessed his deepest fears. He felt like a coward for not letting Randall kill him and for not being able to face death with courage. With a broken voice, Jamie recounted the horrors he endured at Wentworth Prison, where Randall subjected him to unimaginable physical and psychological torment. Jamie described how Randall stripped him of all dignity, using both violence and false tenderness to break his spirit. The most devastating part for Jamie was the emotional manipulation he suffered, being forced to think of Claire in the midst of his torment, turning his love for her into a source of agony. This mixture of pain and humiliation left him unable to bear human contact, especially with Claire, whom he loved deeply, but whose touch he now associated with the trauma he had experienced. Devastated, Jamie begged Claire to leave him, to return to Scotland and go back to her husband. He believed he could no longer be her husband, as the terror and revulsion he felt were insurmountable. With great sorrow, Claire agreed to leave him alone, recognizing that, at that moment, the best thing she could do for him was to respect his wish not to see her in such a state. Confused and desolate, Claire sought solace in the Abbey's chapel, where she confronted the immensity of her pain and Jamie's despair. She struggled with the idea of abandoning him and prayed for an answer, feeling that she held a human soul in her hands, though she didn't know if it was hers or Jamie's. Over time, she realized that, although the situation seemed hopeless, she couldn't give up on Jamie or allow him to give up on himself. That night, Brother William woke her alarmed because Jamie had developed a high fever due to an infection in his wounded hand. Claire, exhausted but determined, fought against the fever using all the means at her disposal. As Jamie deliriously worsened, Abbot Alexander and other monks prepared to administer the last rites, a sacrament that seeks both healing and spiritual peace for the dying. The ritual deeply moved Claire, who faced the possibility of losing Jamie forever. However, when all seemed lost, Claire made a desperate decision. She went to her room and, with a mixture of love and determination, prepared a ritual of her own creation, using her medical knowledge and skills as a healer. Claire recreated the circumstances of Jamie's trauma, manipulating his senses to force him to confront and overcome his inner demons. Although dangerous, Claire's strategy was effective. Jamie, confused and weakened, relived his internal struggle but ultimately was able to free himself from the power Randall held over him. At dawn, Claire and Jamie were found by brother William, exhausted but alive. Jamie, hungry for the first time in days, showed signs of recovery. Though weak, his spirit seemed to have found some peace. Claire, relieved, saw a spark of hope in her husband, knowing that although the battle had been difficult, they had begun a path toward healing. Chapter 40. Claire woke with a start in Jamie's bed but quickly calmed down when she saw Anselm reading by the window. When she asked about Jamie, Anselm informed her that he too was asleep and that 36 hours had passed since they both had fallen into a deep sleep. Still groggy and dizzy, Claire tried to get up, but Anselm convinced her to rest a little longer. Her recent dreams had been violent and disturbing, filled with images of death and beloved faces mixed with scenes of horror. When Claire felt lucid enough, she asked Anselm to hear her confession. Although he suggested that another, more experienced monk would be better, Claire insisted that it had to be him. During the confession, Claire revealed the whole truth, how she had come to this time, her relationship with Frank and Jamie, and the traumatic events she had experienced, including the death of the young English soldier. Anselm, though surprised, reacted calmly and, after some reflection, offered her absolution, stating that God would forgive her sins, whatever they were. The confession provided Claire with an unexpected relief, though she hadn't expected to feel it. When she visited Jamie, she found him much better, though still weakened. However, his physical recovery brought with it a restless and demanding attitude. As Jamie regained his strength, his temperament also returned to its usual state, impatient and stubborn. Claire, recognizing these signs as good news, had to contend with her frustration as he insisted on eating solid food, despite not being ready for it. Jamie, unhappy with his confinement, decided to go outside, even though his condition still didn't allow it. When Claire found him outside, barely dressed and shivering with cold, they had an exchange full of affection and humor, in which Jamie, despite his evident weakness, showed his indomitable spirit. Finally, Claire managed to get him back inside the monastery, where he could rest and warm up while they reflected on what had happened. Later, Jamie shared a disturbing memory with Claire, revealing that Randall, at the end of his torture, had begged him to say that he loved him. This unsettling detail left Claire pondering the complexity and darkness of human emotions, especially those that had been manipulated and distorted by abuse. That night, Jamie, unable to sleep due to the pain and thoughts that tormented him, sneaked into Claire's room to seek comfort in her arms. Although Claire hesitated, wondering if it was the right time for Jamie to be intimate with her again, they both found a rebirth of their connection in that moment. It was an encounter filled with tenderness and a delicate balance between fragility and strength. Finally, they both fell asleep, embraced, with the certainty that they had taken an important step toward recovery, both physically and emotionally. Chapter 41. Over the next 2 weeks, Jamie continued his recovery while Claire wrestled with various thoughts about their future. Sometimes, the idea of going to Rome to help the young pretender seemed the right thing to do, but other times she longed to find a safe and quiet place where they could live in peace. On one of those clear and mild days, Claire found Jamie sitting by the window, examining his wounded hand in the sunlight. Although his body was thinner, his strength and posture had returned to what they had been before. Jamie was looking at his hand, which bore scars and stiff fingers, but the emotion that overwhelmed him wasn't sadness. When Claire confronted him, worried that he regretted the deformity of his hand, Jamie surprised her by revealing that he was crying tears of joy, grateful to have kept both hands thanks to her. Jamie explained that in the time they lived in, amputation was a common practice to prevent an infection from spreading, and he had feared losing his hand, or worse, his life. Claire, deeply moved, realized that she had never considered that possibility, as in her time, antibiotics prevented such tragedies. Jamie showed her a letter he had received from Abbot Alexander, recommending him as a linguistics expert and translator in the service of King James of Scotland. Although the letter opened up the possibility of going to Rome, they both knew that the final decision on their destination rested with Claire. Jamie reaffirmed his commitment to follow her wherever she decided, as his life, his heart, and his soul belonged entirely to her. At that moment, a lay brother delivered a saddlebag sent by Sir Marcus MacRannoch. Inside, Claire found a wolf pelt and a pearl bracelet. The bracelet matched the necklace Jamie had given her on their wedding day, and upon discovering that MacRannoch had given those pearls to Jamie's mother, they both were moved as they reflected on the connection to the man who might have been his father. After this exchange, Jamie took Claire to a special place within the monastery, a hidden cave that housed a hot spring. The warm, mineral-rich water was a healing refuge, and together they immersed themselves in that intimate and private environment. The experience in the cave was deeply sensory and emotional. In the midst of the darkness and warmth of the spring, they united in a moment of passion and love, where Jamie confessed to having dreamed of that moment during his captivity. The spring, with its warm and dense water, provided a space where time seemed to stand still. There, Claire finally decided that they should go to Rome, even though she didn't know exactly what they would do once they got there. Jamie accepted the decision without reservation, willing to follow her wherever necessary. As they remained together in the water, Jamie evoked the sounds Claire made when they were together, which intensified their emotional connection. When they finally emerged from the cave, exhausted but filled with love and relief, Claire revealed to Jamie that she had a gift for him, the possibility of a new beginning, a new future together, marked by the endless possibilities the world offered them. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating literary journey. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to Literary Journeys with River for more summaries like this one. Give it a like, share it with your friends, and let us know in the comments, what would you do if you found yourself trapped in another time? Which Outlander character has impacted you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts.